The following actions take place in broad daylight in the luxurious imperial palace. A modest girl came into the shop to see the young sorceress and told the saleswoman that she had heard that one could get treatment there. The golden-haired sorceress, standing with her back to the visitor and busy with potions, cheerfully tells her that this is possible, but immediately warns that this service will cost her a whole 5,000 gold. She said that she agreed to that price, after which she handed the entire amount to the shop owner. The main character happily exclaimed that it was just wonderful, then thanked the client for the payment. The sorceress threw the money she had earned into the jar, where there were already many more of the same. She couldn't help but be overjoyed at hearing her favorite ringing of coins. The blonde was about to start treating the client, but suddenly a young man burst into the store calling out to her furiously, "The crown prince of Sifos, Helios Utila." A young man with black hair and blue eyes angrily asked the girl what she was doing here without his permission. The sorceress first sighed heavily, then told her husband that he was always so rude and explained that she was engaged in healing. The heir, looking at the jar filled with coins, suddenly asked his wife excitedly if she was seriously going to earn 1,000,000,000 gold coins. She replied that she did, and the prince angrily asked why she needed it, but the lady warned that if their conversation did not bring money, then she did not need it. Smiling slyly, the main character, Celia, told her husband that with the power she possessed, she would earn a lot of money, and then she would easily divorce him. Due to differences in beliefs, the war in this world has been going on for a long time. The magical Grimoire Empire is fighting against the armed Sifos Empire. It would seem that the magical Grimoire Empire had the advantage, but they were severely short of finances, and as a result, they had no advantage and were forced to surrender. The victorious Sifos gave the Grimoire the following ultimatum: they must pay them 1,000,000,000 gold. The representative of the losing country said that this was impossible, and then the emperor ordered that his best sorceress be brought to them as a princess. As a result, the Grimoire authorities chose to send the main character, the Grimoire Empire's archmage, Celia, as their bride. Sifos never had its own mages, and apparently for this reason they decided that the girl's knowledge of magic would be enough to replace this payment. The lady decided to agree to this for the sake of her country, even if she had to marry the most ruthless and cruel man, Helios Utila. 1 year has passed since then. More and more wounded men are arriving in the hospital room, and a crowd of nurses are trying to serve and heal them. Celia, having healed the wound on the guy's chest with her magic, tells him that now everything will be fine and it will heal very quickly. But suddenly the healer catches the gossip of 2 men behind her back, who are talking about how the emperor could have chosen her as a bride. Another gossip told a friend that there was nothing wrong with her treating them. At least she would be of some use. The protagonist understands that the king hoped to increase the military power of his country with her help, but soon after the wedding, he lost interest in her. As a result, the girl was given a job to treat wounded soldiers. When the blonde thought that she needed to distract herself from her thoughts and collect herself, she noticed a guy with a bloody hand entering the room. It turned out to be her husband, who was so badly wounded and exhausted that another soldier brought him to the emergency room. The sorceress immediately rushed to his aid and anxiously asked where he got such wounds. When the doctor began to treat the patient, she suddenly remembered how someone had said that at least she was good at treating. She confessed to Helios that she could also go to the battlefield because she could not only heal, but her strength also allowed her to fight. But the man suddenly shouted at her to stop talking about it. The girl's hands trembled from such surprise. The wounded prince frowned at his wife and said that if she appeared there, she would only be a hindrance. The sorceress was so stunned by his words that she did not find the courage to say anything other than to ask for forgiveness. The lady lowered her head and closed her eyes because she did not like to hear other people's judgments about her, where everyone considered her useless and unnecessary. Later, looking thoughtfully out the window, the heroine remembers that she has been working for the good of the country for 10 years, and no one has recognized her, not even her own husband. But then, while she was looking at the landscape outside the window, a man came up to her from behind and tapped his finger on her shoulder. It turned out to be a smiling guy with white hair, the second prince of Sifos Grid Utila. He greeted the girl and said that he had been looking for her for a long time. The young man says he would like to discuss the magic absorption experiment with her and confirm whether she will participate in it. Celia modestly admits that she is a little nervous. Magic power absorption is a technology that takes away magical power and can then be given to anyone so that they can use magic. Approaching the lady menacingly, Grid says that this is her chance to change in the eyes of the people, and they will show his brother what the great power of magic is capable of. The main character's memory flashes to a moment where Helios, with disgust on his face, says that she will only get in the way on the battlefield. The girl also remembers the words of the knights who believed that she was of absolutely no use. Because of this oppression, she agreed. However, it turned out that Grid tried to take all of her magical power in order to usurp the throne that should have belonged to Helios. The protagonist realized that she was simply being used. Her hands began to tremble when it turned out that she could no longer use magic. Due to Grid's experiment, Celia could no longer use her powers and her will to live fated. Her husband visited her only a month after she lost consciousness. He calmly entered the room and asked his wife how she was feeling. The sick girl said nothing more except that she could no longer use her magical powers. The young man was silent for a while but then said that it was his fault. The sorceress realized that Helios was not changing. His attitude towards her had never changed during these 10 years, and she continued to work in fear of him. The exhausted lady recalls that she really wanted her country to be able to pay 1 billion gold coins so that she would not have to endure it any longer. Here, Celia says something that shocks her husband. She admits in a hoarse voice that it would have been better if she had never married him. While the crown prince was trying to understand what she meant, the girl's hand fell exhausted, and with it, her wedding ring fell off her finger. The heroine has plunged into darkness, but she can feel. She finds it funny that she feels so soft. She does not believe that after death it is so pleasant. Suddenly the girl opens her eyes and sees the face of Helios right in front of her, who is looking intently into her eyes. The lady who had regained consciousness was perplexed, while the prince, as if nothing had happened, wiped her forehead with a cold, damp handkerchief. But suddenly something happened to the girl, and she, shuddering sharply, screamed at the top of her lungs. The young man was very scared and asked her to calm down. The future emperor wanted to ask the healer to explain why she suddenly screamed like that, but this was not possible since the lady threw pillows in his face. As Celia was about to throw another pillow at her husband, she asked with tears in her eyes why he was still there since she had just died. He, trying to dodge the blows, irritably asked what she was even saying and shouted that she had not died at all. At the prince's last words, the sorceress froze in confusion, and the tears stopped flowing from her eyes. When the young lady finally calmed down, Helios explained to her that she had simply lost consciousness in the laboratory. The protagonist, looking at her hands in bewilderment, wonders what all this could mean. To the girl's surprise, all her magical power returned as if she had never lost it before. The young man, meanwhile, asked if she remembered anything, then said that according to the doctor, she lost consciousness because she was tired after the ceremony. The doctor still looked as if she didn't understand anything, and then the husband reminded her that they had recently held a ceremony in honor of their first wedding anniversary. It finally dawned on Celia that she had traveled back in time to the first year of her marriage. The prince hurried to the exit and said that in that case he would return to work, complaining that because of her, he was making his subordinates wait. But his wife suddenly asked in a frightening tone if he wanted to say anything else, since she had already lost consciousness due to fatigue. The heir stopped and, turning to her, asked what else needed to be said and whether she had accidentally hit her head. She angrily replied that she hadn't hurt herself and that she simply didn't like the way he talked to her. When the guy asked what he should say, the girl, with fury in her eyes, replied that if he didn't know, then he should get out of her room. His Highness turned around indifferently and walked on, saying that this was exactly what he was going to do. The man casually mentioned that she would not be going to the battlefield tomorrow, and the surprised sorceress asked why. In response, the crown prince irritably said that this was an order, and she only had to remain silent and obey. The heroine is overcome with panic. She understands that she has returned back, but does not believe that she will not be able to change anything. But she knows that she does not want to live the same life as before, so she knows what to do. At that very moment, she resolutely calls out to her husband and says that she has one proposal for him. He asks what it is. The doctor, having made sure that her magic had not disappeared, asked if one of the conditions in addition to marriage was the payment of 1 billion gold. Helios frowned in confusion and asked what she meant by that. Celia says this means that if the full amount is paid, her suffering will end. The lady decided that she would gain freedom herself with the help of magic and return home. She tells her husband that she will earn 1 billion gold and divorce him. The young man grabbed his head and irritably asked his wife to stop talking nonsense. But the girl said that this was not nonsense and he would quickly understand that she was serious. He turned around and headed towards the exit again, casting an angry glance at his wife and saying that she should better understand her situation. The lady did not have time to answer him, as at that moment she was left alone in the room. The lady was terribly angry at being treated this way. She angrily asked him what right he had to look down on her. The sorceress grabbed her hair at the difficult situation she found herself in and how little time she had left. But the next moment, she gathered all her strength into her hands and decided that she needed to figure out how to make a lot of money. At this time, the crown prince who was outside the girl's door was perplexed and furious that his wife was going to divorce him. Sitting down at the table with a pen and paper, the main character began to think about the fact that she needed to develop a plan to earn 1 billion gold. The girl knows that the potion costs about 500 gold, but it is unrealistic to earn 1 billion on potions alone. She reasons that it would be nice to find a wealthy client and she could increase the price, then she would be able to sell large quantities at once. The lady turned her face to the side thoughtfully, thinking that she had to think of something to sell. She didn't know what the aristocrats of Sifos wanted. The sorceress remembers that before she never went anywhere without Helios's permission, and she knows nothing about local trends, and she doesn't have any girlfriends. But then she gets an idea. She needs to take a walk around the city. The protagonist is sure that the boutique owner is aware of what is fashionable among noble ladies. Celia made up her mind that this was what she would do, and then headed to her closet. The lady opened it cheerfully, exclaiming that she needed to change into something else. But unexpectedly, instead of beautiful dresses inside, there was a pile of revealing underwear of all possible colors. The sorceress, feeling the wildest shame and disgust, closed the wardrobe doors back and leaned against them. The girl remembers that she bought these outfits only so that Helios would pay attention to her. In the past, when the heroine was still trying to win her husband's attention one night, she clung to the prince and insistently asked him not to leave. The lady admitted that other people do not trust her because she is not yet pregnant with his child, so she asks him to spend the night with her. But he abruptly pulled her hands away and asked how many more times she had to repeat it. The man said that he did not want to sleep with her. Celia recalls that her husband never slept with her, and for this the empress branded her a mistake, and people around her often looked down on her. The girl looking at the lace of the revealing lingerie thinks that she seriously believed that this would help keep him. However, at that very moment, the lady realized that she didn't care anymore, and this time she would just throw away all these rags. Suddenly, a maid entered Milady's room and asked what she was doing with the things from the closet. It turned out to be a girl named Mary Loretta, whom Her Highness cheerfully called out to. Mary came to Sifos with the main character. She was a servant who always supported her mistress until her death. Since this girl is the only person the sorceress is truly happy to see, tears appeared in the princess's eyes. The maid asked her in fear why she suddenly started crying. The blonde said she was fine, then asked if she would help throw everything out of the closet. Mary immediately began to worry about this, but the girl answered smilingly that everything was fine and that she no longer needed all these things. The witch also added that she would then fill the closet with new clothes from the boutiques she wanted to go to soon. She asked the maid if she would help. Mary smiled happily and blushed, after which she told the lady that of course she would help her. But suddenly the maid remembers why she came. She tells the lady that Her Majesty is waiting for her and she wants her to come with her husband. Very soon the protagonist and Helios came to the Empress's hall, next to whom stood a certain young girl. The queen spoke of her son's recent offer to appoint him a concubine, and the decision was made to take the duke's daughter, Thelma. The woman ordered the girl to introduce herself, and she, smilingly introducing herself, told the prince and his wife that she was pleased to meet them. The heroine remembered that the day after the first anniversary, Helios suddenly decided to take a concubine. At that time, she was shocked to tears. In the past, upon hearing this news, she fell to the floor in shock and asked her mother-in-law if the problem was that she was not pregnant with an heir. But then the crown prince, paying no attention to his wife, told Thelma that he would rely on her. The new concubine, with a sly smile on her face, responded to His Highness with consent. Now, just the memories of this event make Celia incredibly angry. The empress, meanwhile, told her daughter-in-law that the prince was forced to take a concubine because she could not bear him an heir, and added that she had better say, "Thank you for this." The sorceress is no longer able to contain her rage because she is accused of this, although Helios himself refused to sleep with her. She raised her head to the gentleman and casually called out to Thelma, who turned her gaze to her. Unexpectedly, the princess, instead of being indignant, told the concubine that she was incredibly happy that her husband now had her. The displeased empress asked the princess if she understood why Miss Regno was there at all. Celia recalls moments that she tells the woman she waited for His Highness every night, but he never showed up. She sums it up. In other words, it was not she who failed to fulfill her marital duty, but her beloved crown prince. Her Majesty was so stunned by her daughter-in-law's words that she could not find the words to answer. Her beads of sweat ran down her face, and her nose turned red from embarrassment. The protagonist happily said that since her husband had decided to take a concubine, she could now breathe a sigh of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Helios was incredibly surprised when his wife said that he didn't have to worry about her being offended and that he could do whatever he wanted. Without waiting for an answer, the blonde turned around, waved her hand at everyone, and said that she would go because she had her own plans. Celia walked towards the exit, arguing that she didn't give a damn about the concubine and that she was still planning to divorce the prince. Thelma followed the sorceress with a look full of disgust, as if she were looking not at a person, but at a poisonous snake. A few minutes later, a luxurious carriage was already prepared for Her Highness in the palace courtyard. The main character, having changed into a beautiful, delicate turquoise dress with a hat, asked her servant Mary to quickly follow her. The maid excitedly asked the mistress if everything would be okay since she had not asked her husband's permission. She replied that everything was fine since they were not little children anymore. Before getting into the carriage, Celia asked the coachman to take them to the nearest boutique, and he agreed. Sitting down on a soft seat and looking out the window, the witch thinks that she is clearly putting an end to her past self, and for her this is a great relief. It turns out that Helios had been closely watching the lady's carriage from the window all this time. He angrily ordered his knights to follow his wife and not take their eyes off her. The owner of the boutique, having placed aromatic tea on the table for Mrs. Celia, said that if she needed anything, she could safely call her. The heroine thanked her, but as soon as the girl began to leave, the princess immediately called out to her as she wanted to ask her something. The blonde says that dresses that emphasize the waist are popular lately, so she says that she will probably need a corset too. The shop owner suddenly stopped and, standing with her back to the customer, sighed heavily. But at that very moment she showed the lady her brightest smile and said that she understood her desire and would immediately bring her fashionable and popular corsets. The sorceress thanked her shyly, but remained perplexed by what had just happened. Did it seem to her that the girl sighed or not? After some time, Celia, looking at the luxurious corsets, wonders if there are other lingerie designs in this boutique because she is afraid that the corset will be too tight for her. The saleswoman replied that she could look at popular models that were selling well or make a special order. The protagonist smiled and said that it was a good idea and that she would then place an order. The lady then says she would like to buy something else, but then she notices a jar of corset cream, which she will also need to buy. However, as soon as she opened the jar, a terribly disgusting aroma immediately came from it, and the saleswoman asked if she wanted to buy it. The lady replied that she would probably refuse, thinking that this cream stunk so much that she would never buy it for anything in her life. The witch wondered if she could use magic to create something better than the smelly cream that gave her a rash. A few minutes later, the boutique owner, escorting the customers home, tells the princess that when they finish sewing, they will send the order to her palace. The customer thanked her, and she, casting a sidelong glance at Her Highness and her servant, loudly slammed the door behind her. Mary was very upset by this. The girl does not understand why they slam the door like that, as if they wanted to throw them out all this time. And Celia, calmly walking on, suggested that the saleswoman simply had a lot of work and should be left alone. However, she thought about the fact that her attitude towards them, her clients, was really not the best. Suddenly, the princess notices a child on the road who tripped and hit his head on the asphalt. The boy, having badly injured his knees, remained sitting on the road and crying bitterly from the pain. The main character immediately ran up to him, calling him "poor thing," and the bewildered maid asked her mistress where she was running to. Running up to the victim, the girl asked him not to cry and said that everything was fine and that she would help him now. Placing her palms on the boy's wounded leg, the sorceress asked him to be patient for a little while. Immediately after this, Celia worked magic that healed the baby's wound. The child watching this magic said that it was very beautiful. Everything was going smoothly until the moment when the boy's angry mother ran up to him and asked the princess what she was doing. She suddenly grabbed her son by the hand and dragged him along quickly, leading him away from the healer. Stunned to the spot with confusion, Celia listens to her mother's words that she is the very crown princess that rumors are circulating about, and she should not be approached because she might be up to something. Still not understanding what is happening, the princess hears gossip from people standing on the sidelines that she used magic on the child. People think that what is usually used as a weapon she used on a child. Very dangerous, and it has no place on city streets at all. The girl bowed her head sadly. She knew that people in the city hated her, but she didn't think it was that much. Suddenly, the girl felt a chicken egg fly into her face. It broke and flowed down her hair. Meanwhile, Prince Helios and his subordinate drive through the forest at the speed of a bullet. He is worried because he does not understand why his wife went to the city because something could happen to her, and he swore to protect her. The young man recalls the moment when he was at a wedding standing next to his future wife, listening to a confession from a priest. The groom, looking at the bride, remembered that he had heard that she was the best magician in her country, but he did not believe that this girl could be so talented. Finally, the priest invited the prince to kiss the bride, and he lifted Celia's veil with his fingers, thinking that he had already resigned himself to everything and would do what was necessary. But when he pulled the transparent veil back, he suddenly saw in front of him an incredibly pretty blonde with innocent blue eyes. The guy froze from something unexpected. He felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Since then, Helios's feelings for the sorceress only grew. On their wedding night, when his wife asked him where he was going, her husband thought that she had broken apart from his touch alone. When 3 months had passed since the wedding, the butler informed the master that it seemed that using offensive magic was taking a lot of energy, and then the prince suggested that his wife only needed to take up healing. And when 6 months had passed since their wedding, the heir overheard a conversation between knights about how Celia was useless, and he realized that it was dangerous to let her go into the city. But to his surprise, she still resolutely went there, and even declared that she would divorce him. Helios gritted his teeth and decided that now was not the time to think about it, because the sorceress had gone to the city without a guard, and something could happen to her. He quickened his horse's pace and galloped forward, thinking that he must reach her quickly, and his astonished companion asked where he was going in such a hurry. The princess's maid ran up to her, who was covered in egg, and wiping the lady's face with a handkerchief, declared how cruel it was and asked who had done it. The 2 guards standing nearby began to whisper. One of them asked his friend if they needed to find the one who threw the egg at the lady. But another guard suddenly responded that it was too much of a hassle and advised his friend to just ignore it. Mary excitedly told Her Highness that they needed to leave here immediately. Suddenly, someone from the crowd nearby shouted insults at Celia, calling her useless and ordering her to get out of their state. After what was said, the hooligan rushed away from the square, but the main character does not think of letting him go just like that. And before the impudent fellow had time to run even a couple of steps, he suddenly flew into the air, leaving all the townspeople around him in a stupor. It turned out that it was Celia who had detained him with her magic. The girl began to mutter angrily under her breath about how quickly she had found the culprit, and the 2 guards who had previously not paid attention to the hooliganism towards the princess shuddered when she said that for them, apparently there was no longer any hassle. The sorceress, picking up her hat from the ground, told the boys that they had essentially refused to do their job, which meant that they were no use. The princess angrily asked the guards if it would be fair if she stripped them of their knighthood right there. The 2 guards instantly shuddered and gasped in chilling fear. They quickly bowed their heads to the princess and began to apologize to her. But then a sound was heard that made Celia switch her attention. As it turned out, it was her husband, Prince Helios, who had arrived and was greeted with joyful cries by a crowd of residents. Unlike the other people who were happy to see the gentleman, the girl stood there worriedly and wondered why he had come here. The heir, glancing briefly at the hooligan lying on the ground, asked what the noise had just been. The princess's maid replied that Her Highness was simply treating a cut on the child's leg. Then Mary, pointing her finger at the same impudent fellow, told the gentleman that this man had insulted her wife by throwing an egg at her. Helios's expression immediately changed, and he asked the girl again in a serious tone. Celia meanwhile pursed her lips, thought that it was all useless because her husband didn't care what happened to her. But the prince ordered the knights to be stopped immediately, and when the offenders were brought to him, he asked why they had done nothing when the princess had been insulted. They were too afraid to answer. Then His Highness sternly declared to the boys that they were no longer knights, and ordered both of them to disappear from his sight forever. The heir's subordinates immediately seized the offenders, who still begged His Highness for mercy. The protagonist, looking at her husband's face, thinks that she doesn't understand at all what's going on and what the hell is going on in his head. After some time, the princess and the prince, accompanied by guards, returned to the palace. Helios, silently walking down the corridor, is angry at the very thought that the knights were next to his wife, and nevertheless allowed such a situation to happen. The man thought that he was not doing his job as a husband well, and said out loud through clenched teeth that it was disgusting, which left Celia stunned. The sorceress, thinking that he was talking about her, mockingly asked his forgiveness for the fact that she, a thorn in his side, had caused him so many problems. But at that very moment, the girl happily declared that he could rest easy, because when she earned 1 billion gold coins, she would immediately leave him. The gentleman was very taken aback by this, and angrily asked the lady what she was saying. The two guards looked at each other in confusion, and the witch repeated that she would earn some money and then go wherever she wanted. The heir was dumbfounded with shock because he realized that it turns out his wife had not been joking all this time. Still, the master asked his wife not to use magic like that anymore, but she irritably asked why this was and whether he considered her magic dangerous. His Highness nervously clenched his fist and replied that he did not mean anything like that, and if she did everything she wanted, there would be more work. Mr. Utala thinks that if she does something like that again, he won't be able to help her. But from his thoughts, the prince could only say that she was only getting in the way, which didn't surprise the girl at all. Celia sighed heavily and admitted that she should have known he would say that. The doctor said indifferently that in that case it would only be better for him if she left, so the lady asked Mary to go with her to the laboratory. But Helios suddenly announced that from today on she was forbidden to enter there, and until she changed her mind about the divorce, research was prohibited. A short time later, the prince was already in his office, hard at work, thinking about what had just happened. He recalls the moment when he told his wife that she was not allowed to do research, and she responded that it would only make things worse for him. The heir was so angry about what happened that he involuntarily squeezed the pen in his palm so hard that it broke into dozens of pieces. The young man does not understand why everything goes wrong, and why he always does not know what to say in front of Celia. The butler, standing next to the thoughtful gentleman, wanted to say something but did not have time because someone knocked on the door. Helios, encouraged by the fact that this could be his wife, allowed the unexpected guest to enter. But instead of her, Thelma entered the room wanting to ask His Highness about the budget. But she suddenly hesitated and asked the prince why he was looking at her like that. The heir looked at the concubine with an incredibly disappointed look, since his expectations were not met. The girl said that she could not believe that he was so unfriendly to her, and then smilingly leaning towards the prince asked if she could give him some advice. Without waiting for an answer from him, the lady began to chatter about how they had known each other for a very long time, but only now had she become his concubine. But Helios did not let her finish. The man told the lady that as he had already said, he needed her only to make the empress leave him alone. Thelma immediately flinched in fear and said that she had tried to be kind to him. The dissatisfied girl asked the prince who raised him so that he grew up to be such a rude person. The young gentleman frowned and fell silent, but thought about it. He had long since forgotten how to express his emotions. He remembers that as a child he showed no mercy to become a cold-blooded king. He was forbidden to show tears, but now he does not know what to do. Before leaving, Thelma advised the heir to get rid of the habit of throwing angry glances, otherwise he would intimidate his own butler. The concubine said goodbye and left, and the young master immediately glanced at his butler. The prince saw that his subordinate was indeed trembling with fear, for which he apologized to him. The man grabbed his head in irritation and said that he couldn't do anything properly. The butler told the heir that words matter, and perhaps he should speak what he feels. Helios was interested in the servant's advice and asked what he meant. The old man smiled softly and said that he just needed to talk, and all problems would be solved. Time flew by quickly, and as night fell, the windows in the imperial palace lit up. The crown prince walking down the corridor reflects on the fact that he said too much to Thelma, and perhaps he should apologize to her. The young man wondered if he should say what he felt, because if he did, he could change his relationship with Celia. Stopping in front of the door to his wife's room, the future emperor suggested that perhaps in that case, she would abandon the idea of divorce. Knocking delicately, Helios entered his wife's room and at the same moment shouted that he was coming to see her. But Celia suddenly ordered him to stay where he was because she appeared before him in only a corset, which greatly embarrassed the girl. The man's eyes widened as big as 2 kopecks. He, unable to utter a word, froze in place. The main character, confused by the fact that her husband did not take his eyes off her, involuntarily blushed and covered her body with her hands. Helios, immediately blushing and turning away, began waving his hands and saying that he was not looking at her at all. But when the girl furiously ordered him to finally leave the room, the gentleman immediately jumped out the door. Helios, confusedly covering his face with his hand, thought that he had made a mistake again. Meanwhile, the protagonist, pacing around the bedroom with displeasure, is outraged that she told him to wait, but this rude man came in anyway. The young lady also remembers that in the morning he hissed through his teeth, "Disgusting," which makes her even angrier. She doesn't understand what's wrong with this guy. But still, the sorceress, sighing tiredly, decides to forget about this situation because now she has something more important. Taking a beautiful crystal jar in her hands, she decides to focus her attention on the cream that is inside. Having unfastened her corset, the lady stood in front of the mirror and looked at her waist, which was all covered in bruises and contusions. Without thinking twice, she takes a small amount of golden cream on her fingertips and smears it on her wounds. The abrasions and bruises immediately disappeared from the girl's skin without a trace, which made her very happy. She decided that this product would sell well. Suddenly, a maid knocked on the door and told her mistress that she had brought her tea. Celia allowed her to enter. Mary, after first asking forgiveness for disturbing him, entered the bedroom carrying with her a tray of fragrant tea. She, noticing the jars of potions and the many documents lying on the princess's desk, asked if she had continued to do research since that day. The sorceress, putting on her nightgown, replied that that was true, and she did it whenever she had a free minute. The maid smiled and said that this was very wonderful, but asked the mistress not to forget to find time to rest. Suddenly, Mary felt a pleasant aroma and told the witch that her room smelled of something pleasant. The witch was glad to hear her words. Celia told the servant that it was the scent of jasmine. That was the smell of the cream she had tried for cuts and rashes. The girl showed her waist and said that thanks to this product, there are no wounds on her skin, and her waist looks like new. Mary applauded the lady for her success and asked if she had used magic when she created this cream, as it was simply a brilliant idea. The princess, still admiring herself in the mirror, declared that she would sell this healing cream and earn money for a divorce. The servant said excitedly that earning $1 billion was very difficult, but the blonde consoled her by saying that after visiting the boutique, she realized the potential of magic. The heroine, also looking thoughtfully at the jar of cream, added that she wanted to check if she could change the opinion of the people of Sifos. The maid, pouring tea into the princess's cup, said that a lot had happened to her today, and therefore she should first of all rest. The girl looked away thoughtfully and told Mary that she was right. But suddenly, the main character's eyes lit up because she had some kind of brilliant idea. The next day, the protagonist arrives at an elegant imperial greenhouse where she has a meeting arranged with an important gentleman. A smiling young man with wheat-colored hair and red earrings asked the princess if she liked the tea. He told the lady that it was a relaxing tea because he heard that she had been working a lot lately. Celia laughed and said that the drink was indeed very tasty, after which she thanked the gentleman. In the past, the heroine believed that the second prince of Sifos, Prince Grid Utila, was the only person who listened to her. The country prizes swordsmanship, which Grid was not good at, causing him to be despised by his parents, who always compared him to his brother Helios. Because no one recognized him, he stole Celia's power to become stronger than his brother. The princess thinks she doesn't understand what he felt then, but she still feels sorry for him. Here Grid asked his interlocutor what she wanted to talk to him about. The main character remembered everything and began to rummage through her basket, telling the man that she wanted to show him something. The second prince was very surprised when the girl showed him a body cream created with the help of magic, which is very useful for girls wearing a corset. The master was amazed that Celia used magic, after which for some reason he showed his servant a special gesture that interested the sorceress. The subordinate brought the gentleman a small chest, and Grid smilingly told the guest that he in fact also wanted to show her something. From the box, the gentleman took out an interesting golden device that had a small stand with an attached lid. The prince admitted that although this device was still in development, she could still measure her magical power. The guy put a jar of cream into a magic meter, after which the thing immediately began to emit light. He asked if it was cool, and the main character, for some reason embarrassed, answered that it was. The sorceress remembers that this prototype will be used to create a machine that takes away all her magic, and Grid has been planning everything since that moment. Smiling tenderly, the prince told his guest that if she had anything else interesting created with the help of magic, she should let him know. The girl agreed, but suddenly remembered that she had actually called the second heir here on business, but he had distracted her with his stories. She awkwardly suggested to the gentleman to move on to the main topic of their conversation and asked if he could show her healing cream to his lady friends. The lady added that she just wanted to check whether it worked or not. Grid, having slightly opened the lid of the cream, suddenly froze when he smelled its aroma. The princess asked him if he liked the smell and was about to tell him how she had prepared it yesterday, but the young man suddenly got up from his chair. A puzzled Celia asked the gentleman what had happened, but he only walked silently towards her. He gently stroked a strand of the girl's hair with his fingertips and came close to her face, saying that she turned out to be very cunning. Meanwhile, Prince Helios walked through the corridors of the castle collecting bows from his subordinates. Suddenly he lowered his head in shame and thought that he couldn't believe that he had walked in while Celia was changing. He was angry that he couldn't do anything right. Thinking that he should apologize to her, the gentleman turned to his wife's maid and asked if she was in her room. She first answered that she was now in the greenhouse, but suddenly hesitated because she remembered that the lady had a meeting with Grid today. As soon as the girl decided to continue her speech, she noticed that there was no trace left of the prince. The maid immediately panicked. Knowing that she had accidentally let the master know where his wife was, she began to think about what to do. Helios is already heading to the greenhouse where his wife is alone with Grid. The young man approaching the entrance to the greenhouse met two guards who greeted him. The man asked them if Celia was there. But the prince was very surprised when one of his subordinates replied that yes, but she was not there alone but with Mr. Grid. The heir decided to take a peek and boldly approach the glass to find out what his wife was doing there. It was impossible to imagine his surprise when he saw the sorceress over whom Grid was bending, holding a lock of her hair in his hand. Helios, unable to contain his displeasure, involuntarily clenched his fist. But he turned around as if nothing had happened and walked back, ordering the guards not to tell anyone that he had come. The subordinate, worried by the master's suddenly changed mood, agreed. Meanwhile, the main character, pushing away the annoying gentleman, asked him not to do it again. He smiled and asked for forgiveness. The princess, blushing in embarrassment and frowning, asked His Highness not to approach her like that again without warning because it frightened her. Grid agreed, but admitted that in fact the aroma of jasmine which the cream smells like was to blame for everything. It is the same as an aphrodisiac, and he took this as an invitation. The dissatisfied girl jumped up from her chair and declared that this was not true at all. Grid laughed and said he was just kidding, but still thought she should tone down the scent a little so men wouldn't get the wrong idea. Milady put her elbows on the table, offended, but agreed with the man's opinion. The girl, thinking that the prince is up to his old tricks again, decides to collect her thoughts and invites her interlocutor to return to business. Celia asks Grid to give her cream to all his close girls because she wants them to try it. The prince with the same bright smile asked why she chose him and not someone else. The sorceress replied that she wanted to start a business using magic so that people would understand that it was safe, so she turned to someone who understood this. His Highness narrowed his eyes suspiciously when the girl asked him if he really knew many girls. The protagonist warned that he, of course, did not need to pay for this cream because first, he needed to interest people. The lady also remembered what she forgot to say: this cream heals skin damage. Grid flinched slightly when Celia asked if he was aware that Duke Lauren's daughter suffered from a skin condition. The Duke of Lauren's family is one of the 3 richest families in Sifos. They sponsored Grid's research, but it was of little use. The heroine remembers that the Duke adores his daughter, and if there is an opportunity to cure her illness, Grid can take advantage of it. The girl asked the prince to give her the cream first. The second heir smiled and looked down, telling the lady that he understood what she had in mind. The man said that he would agree if she asked so, which made the sorceress very happy. The sorceress thanked her friend. The protagonist smiled and blushed from the realization that her first step towards success had been taken. Celia, happily walking down the palace corridor, hums a song about how everything went even more smoothly than she expected, although it was a little dangerous. The girl decides that now all that remains is to wait for the reaction of the aristocrats, and then perhaps they will be interested in her future products. Suddenly, Milady was pulled out of her thoughts by Helios, who appeared from behind, greeted his wife, and said that he had been looking for her for a long time. Celia, without greeting her husband with a greeting or a simple smile, immediately asked what he needed. He, looking sadly at the floor, admitted that he would like to apologize to her for yesterday. A drop of sweat ran down the young man's face, and he said that yesterday he had entered her room without her permission, and therefore he asked for forgiveness for that. The girl swallowed her tongue for a second and froze in place, as if not believing what was happening. But the next moment she grits her teeth, walks past the prince, and says that he didn't need to apologize at all. The man, asking his wife to wait a little, asked what she had talked about with Grid. Celia, furious that her husband had been following her, turned around and shouted that it was none of his business. The lady walked away from the bewildered groom, who objected that it certainly did concern him. His Majesty, grabbing Celia by the hand, thereby stopping her, declared that this did concern him. After all, he was her husband. The main character irritably ordered Helios to let her go and pulled her hand away, although he begged her to stop because they had not finished the conversation yet. Nevertheless, the sorceress continued to run away, and approaching the stairs leading down, she thought angrily that all this time he had not even noticed her, and now he was declaring that he was her husband. The girl was so lost in thought that she didn't pay attention to the steps and accidentally tripped. At the moment when the princess was already flying down, Helios ran up to the unfortunate woman and desperately reached out his hand to her, wanting to catch her. Luckily, the main character managed to avoid falling. Her husband deftly caught her and hugged her. The heir asked the lady if she was hurt. The embarrassed blonde, frozen in fear like a rabbit, answered no. The girl told the young man that she was fine and he could let her go. But as soon as she wanted to move her leg, she felt a hellish pain in her ankle. The prince asked what had happened, and the lady admitted that she felt pain. But when the sorceress said that she would simply heal the wound with magic, Helios immediately frowned and became worried. The man grabbed the witch's hand and insistently asked her not to use magic. But when the victim tried to ask why he suddenly picked up his surprised wife in his arms and said that he would take her to the doctor himself, the prince quickly carried his wife into the bedroom where the doctor bandaged the lady's leg, explaining that she simply had a slight sprain that would heal in a week. The doctor also told the sorceress that her complexion was not quite healthy, so he asked if she was sleeping well. She smiled sheepishly and admitted that she had been busy lately and hadn't gotten enough sleep. The doctor said that this was probably why she was so unsteady on her feet. He advised the lady to give her body a rest, to which Celia agreed. After this, the doctor decided to leave, and the princess and her husband were left alone. The girl decided to ask Helios why he didn't let her use magic. He replied that he knew that when she used magic, her body weakened. The sorceress said that weak spells did not affect the body in any way. The young man was embarrassed when he realized that his rescue was unnecessary, but the princess thanked him for catching her. She asked if it was hard to carry, and the heir replied that it was not. His Highness recalls the moment when he carries a confused Celia in his arms, who clings to his chest, causing him to blush like a peach. The man decided to immediately ask the victim for forgiveness for picking her up without warning, then asked why she was not getting enough sleep. The lady replied sadly that she was doing research in her room, but since she did not have the necessary equipment, it took longer. Suddenly, the prince, apologizing to his wife for the health problems she now had because of him, allowed her to use the laboratory. Celia looked at her husband in bewilderment, wondering what had happened to him because she had never expected such a reaction from him. Soon after, Helios actually opened the laboratory with all the equipment for the main character, and 2 weeks have passed since then. The sorceress, pulling herself up after the work done, thinks how great it is to spend time doing research. Then the maid knocked on the door, apologizing to the mistress in advance for disturbing her. She said that everything was fine and asked what was the matter. Mary said she wanted to report what the maids had said about her cream. The witch happily asked what they had said, but the smile disappeared from the young lady's face when the maid verbatim conveyed that the magic cream that His Highness Grid made is simply wonderful. Grid, as if nothing had happened, was calmly sipping tea in the greenhouse, but suddenly Celia called out to him irritably. The girl, frowning and smiling at the same time, angrily placed her hands on the table and told the prince that she had a couple of questions for him. He, asking the lady to at least catch her breath, asked what was going on. The princess furiously asked since when her cream had become his. The man, laughing at what the real problem was, said that the first copy of the cream actually belonged to her. The lady wanted to object, but Grid said that when he mentioned Celia's name when handing over the cream, no one even wanted to take it in their hands. The girl's face sank, and the prince continued speaking. He had no other choice because in their kingdom they hate magic, and the heroine is a sorceress. The man admitted that he thought she understood this. He, confessing to the heiress that he was very sorry, said that here she was, disgusted. Evening has come, and Celia, sadly leaning over her table with laboratory supplies, remembers Grid's words that she is disgusting to everyone. Touching the jar of cream, the lady thought that she of course understood that she was from a hostile country, and for the local inhabitants magic was a very powerful weapon, but the war was already over. The young lady decided that she would definitely get out of this country someday, but for now she is the crown princess of Sifos. Helios is in his office thinking about how he closed the lab because he hoped his wife would consider divorce, but he opened it anyway. He did it because her health is paramount. The man understands that a week has passed since the lab closed, and she has not slept enough all this time. Suddenly, Celia knocked on the prince's door, introduced herself, and asked if she could come in. He allowed her to. His Highness asked the lady in a puzzled voice if she really wanted to take part in the ball, and she replied that she did. The princess realizes that if she wants people to realize the benefits of magic, then showing it to everyone at the ball is the easiest way. The lady reminds her husband that it has been a year since she got married, and she wants to express her gratitude to everyone who accepted her with the help of magic. The man found this idea dubious, but the main character boldly asked him if she could attend the ball. But the prince immediately replied that he did not. The girl sadly bowed her head and thought that she knew he would say that, but she was not going to give up. She, without showing her husband a drop of her sadness, asked if she could find out the reason for his refusal. Helios told Milady that if she used magic in a place where there were many who hated her, something bad might happen again. Celia replied that if he allowed her to use it, she could resolve this misunderstanding, and people would stop being afraid. The heir says that if she wants people to accept magic, then they need to be accustomed gradually, and the number of potion orders should be increased. The wife said that this was not the issue now. If nothing was done, she was at a disadvantage and there was a threat of rebellion. This could threaten the survival of the entire nation. Over time, the country's population stopped supporting Helios, and if this happens in this life, the situation will affect the protagonist's future business. Beads of sweat ran down the prince's face. He clenched his jaw nervously and said that this was all very serious. But Celia suddenly asked the man sternly if he knew that she was called a useless princess. The young lady thought that her feelings were a trifle for her husband. But she believes that you can't let everyone say whatever they want about your wife, so she openly tells the prince that it irritates her. The lady adds that this ball is very important to her. It will give her a place in Siphus's society. She asks the prince to consider her request. The heir thought that for the sake of his wife he limited her in using magic, but in the end he only harmed her even more. And her desire is not surprising. Suddenly, the young gentleman says that he will go to meet her, which leaves the princess in a stupor. The man said that she could use magic at the ball, after which a bright smile appeared on Celia's face and her cheeks turned red. The main character enthusiastically handed her husband several papers and asked him to look at the plan she had prepared. Helios, looking at the notes, thinks that he hopes that everything will go smoothly, and he doesn't want Celia to be called useless. Two young girls and Mrs. Thelma were chatting in a spacious flower greenhouse in the middle of a bright, warm day. One of the ladies asked the concubine if she would dance with the prince at the ball that would be held the following week, and she replied that she doubted it. One of the young ladies said that this couldn't be true because she looked better with him than Celia, but Thelma calmly replied that it was rude to say that. The guilty girl immediately apologized, and the other lady cheerfully reminded her friends that His Highness Grid would also be participating in the ball. The concubine froze in surprise when the ladies spoke about how this gentleman seemed scary to them at first, but then they realized that he was a good man. She pursed her lips in displeasure and thought that Grid was just a clown who played with girls, and her friends didn't even know how many ladies cried because of him. Suddenly, one of her friends cheerfully exclaimed that the second heir had given her something wonderful at their last meeting. Another lady asked in a stunning tone whether he had really given her a gift, but the concubine remained calm and did not react in any way. But Thelma's fingers holding the mug of tea trembled when the girl admitted that Grid had given her the magic cream. Mademoiselle showed her friends this very cream and said that it smelled very delicious and instantly removed the irritation from the skin. The guests were surprised that magic could be used in this way. One of the young ladies asked warily if there were any side effects from such a cream, and Thelma suddenly supported her friend, saying that she considered it dangerous. She says that magic should not be a part of their normal life, and it should not exist because it violates the laws of nature created by God. The women were at first frightened by the concubine's cold-bloodedness, but then they smilingly declared that she was right and magic was terrible. Thelma, with a warm smile, told Grid's mistress that if she needed a good cream, she would bring hers next time. Staring angrily at the jar of cream, the girl reasons that magic is not needed by Siphus, and such a dangerous thing should not exist. The week flew by very quickly, and soon a ball began in the imperial palace to which all the noble people of the country came. The crown prince, looking at his wife, who was sitting next to him on the throne, thought that she had a very serious expression on her face. The man quickly realized that she was nervous, so he began to think about how to help her with this. But then a wonderful idea appears in his head which he, without thinking twice, decides to bring to life. Helios called out to the girl and told her about one technique that would help her calm down. He advised her to draw a circle on her hand with her finger and sit on it, imagining that this was her anxiety. The princess looked at the young man in surprise, and His Highness added that his butler had taught him this technique. He continued to twirl the imaginary excitement in his hand and advised his wife to try doing this because it could help her. Suddenly, Celia, laughing loudly, replied that she would definitely try, after which she thanked the heir. The girl began to eat imaginary excitement, and the prince, looking at this, thought that she would cope, and so that she would not worry, he would always be there. Two men looking at the princess sitting next to the prince are surprised that she was also at the ball. The guest told his friend that he had heard that Celia was a very reserved person, but suddenly the gentleman fell silent because he saw snow falling in the middle of the hall. The other visitors to the ball were very surprised when they saw beautiful snowflakes falling from above, and they thought that it was some kind of special performance. Grid, having caught one of the snowflakes in his hands, was the first to guess that magic was involved. Then suddenly something incredible happens. The small crystal in his hand turns into a glass of champagne. Those around them, seeing this miracle, could not contain their admiration and thought that this was some new technology of Siphos, and they were guaranteed a bright future with such skills. Here, the main character, rising from the throne and walking towards the guests, happily asked if they liked the performance. Celia told the people that she created this snow herself with her magic. Those present immediately became frightened and outraged by the fact that this, it turns out, was not the latest technology of Siphos, The girl told the rich people that magic can take on different objects, and they only need to imagine what they want and touch the snowflake. The guests immediately declared that they would not do this because they did not think that it was magic. The princess, listening to the people's discontent, became embarrassed and realized that it would not be possible to accustom them to magic so quickly, although she thought it would be easier. But then Grid, the snowflake in whose hand suddenly turned into a beautiful rose, declared that he was seeing such magic for the first time, and it was simply wonderful. He lovingly brought the red bud to his lips and said that magic could be so charming. One girl, hearing the gentleman's words, decided that since he himself thought so, then maybe she should try, after which she touched the snowflake. As soon as she did this, the tiny ice, in a split second, turned into the cute toy she had imagined in her mind, and the lady exclaimed in delight. Everyone present at the ball began to experiment with magic, and each snowflake produced its own unique item, which amused them greatly. Celia, looking away in embarrassment, thought that Grid's words had immediately changed the atmosphere, which surprised her very much. Suddenly, a young man approaches the lady and calls out to her. She looks at him in bewilderment. Mr. Grid appeared in front of the lady, smiling sweetly and handing her a red rose. After giving the princess the gift, kneeling before her and touching his forehead to her palm, the man confessed to Celia that he was touched by her magic, and that it was a great honor for him to see her today. The main character was speechless for a second from shock, but still answered that she should have thanked him. Suddenly, Helios intervenes in the conversation of the young people. He grabbed his wife by the wrist, while Grid held her hand. The irritated prince asked his brother how long he intended to keep his wife like this. He immediately laughed and asked for forgiveness, but said that it was not nice to be jealous of your brother. The prince became even more angry and asked his friend to watch his words, otherwise he might accidentally bite his tongue. Grid finally decided to leave the heir alone and, rising to his feet, told his brother with a smile that he understood everything. The man, coquettishly waving goodbye to the prince, said that they would see each other again. As Helios sat back down on the throne, the protagonist looked at him and thought that these brothers really did have a bad relationship. However, looking at the cheerful guests who were constantly turning snowflakes into cute things, the princess realized that she was very glad that she had succeeded. The girl, thinking that she needed to take advantage of the chance that Grid had given her and shouldn't stand still any longer, stood up and walked over to the guests. Meanwhile, an elegantly dressed Thelma, who was a little late arriving at the ball, approaches the entrance to the palace. But suddenly, opening the doors, she saw dozens of young ladies and gentlemen having fun with the snow falling from nowhere. The girl was truly stunned when she realized that real snowflakes were falling from the ceiling in the ballroom, but she noticed that they were somehow unusual. As she walked along, the concubine noticed one of the ladies saying that she thought magic was a terrible thing, but it turned out that there was nothing bad about it. A look of genuine horror appeared on the young lady's face when she heard people calling magic not so bad. Thelma immediately ran up to her two friends and ordered them to leave immediately. They asked in surprise why. The fact that the girls did not understand why they had to run stunned the lady even more. She reminded them that the entire hall was filled with magic. However, suddenly one of the girls asked her friend if magic was really as scary as they thought. The concubine froze in surprise and asked the lady what she meant. She told the girl that if she touched the falling snowflakes, they would turn into whatever she thought of, and suggested that she try. But Thelma, without reacting to this in any way and walking away from her friends, told them that they, as it turned out, had also fallen under its effect. Celia was chatting pleasantly with a gentleman when an enraged opponent of magic ran up to her. The concubine called out to the princess, who asked what had happened. The brunette immediately ordered the girl to stop casting spells. Thelma angrily told the heroine that she was putting everyone at the ball in danger and she couldn't just watch and remain silent. The girl says that magic dissolves in the air, gets into the body, and can cause disorders. She accuses the witch of poisoning everyone. Confused, Celia asked the lady to stop making baseless accusations and stated that magic was safe and did not disappear into thin air. However, the concubine furiously ordered her mistress to stop lying because everyone already guessed that she was hiding the truth in order to protect herself. The protagonist continued to look at the girl in bewilderment, not understanding what she was even talking about. Suddenly, the prince ran up to the ladies and excitedly asked what was going on. But the sorceress showed him her palm, asking him to wait. She calmly tells Thelma that when she created the potion, their scientists checked them all to make sure they were not dangerous. The princess added that the inspection was led personally by His Highness Grid, and the best scientists of Cephos as well as doctors confirmed the safety of her magic. Thelma countered that the results of these tests could easily be falsified, and she herself did not believe it. Suddenly, a tall, gray-haired man, who is the commander of the knights, intervenes in the girls' conversation. He says that he also participated in these tests. The man tells Thelma that as she sees after the tests he has been given, he is as healthy as a bull, and thanks to the heiress, the survival rate of the knights has increased. Looking at the commander with admiration, Her Highness recalls that she used to think that the knights hated her, but apparently there were those who were on her side. Milady was very pleased with this thought, and she asked the concubine with a smile if she would like to look at her laboratory. The blonde explained that if she saw everything with her own eyes, she would definitely understand that magic was safe. But Thelma, turning away in irritation, said that she would never do that, and that she had better go. Walking towards the exit, the girl finally told Celia and the guests that if they continued to turn a blind eye to the truth, they would regret it someday. The door slammed shut behind the concubine, leaving the ladies and gentlemen completely confused. The main character remembers that in her past life she only talked to Thelma a couple of times, and therefore knows nothing about her at all, and if she hates magic so much, then she has her reasons. The prince approached the sorceress and excitedly asked if she was okay, and the girl answered that she was. Suddenly, the couple's attention is drawn to the sound of people laughing behind them and talking about how they didn't know their country was doing magical research. Grid happily tells the guests of honor that if magic were so dangerous, their country would no longer exist. These statements from the second heir made the witch smile warmly. Then the tall man in the green uniform approached the young lady again and admitted that he really liked her magical snow. The knight commander said with a smile that he had only seen healing magic, and then asked Celia if she could show him anything else. The princess's eyes immediately sparkled, and she replied that of course she could, and she already knew what exactly. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thelma decided to go out onto the balcony away from all the guests to get some fresh air. The girl clenched her teeth in anger at the mere thought that everyone thought magic was safe, even though she thought it was a weapon to kill people. The concubine thinks that if magic did not exist in this world, nothing would have happened to her father. She remembers how as a child one day she cried and looked at her burning house calling for her father. The building was ablaze with blue magical flames, and little Thelma was screaming at her brother who was holding her in his arms that they needed to go back there for their father. Unfortunately, the crying baby witnessed several magical missiles hitting her house again. Tears began to flow from Thelma's eyes as she begged her brother and mother to stop doing nothing and quickly help their father who was left in the burning building. But no one listened to her, and soon the palace shattered into thousands of pieces, and the girl's childish voice desperately called out to her dad for the last time. The girl leaned against the railing, her tears falling into her palms. She thinks that as soon as she saw the magic, she remembered the day her father was taken away. While the concubine was thinking about why people were on Celia's side and how she wanted to hug her father, she suddenly heard the prince's voice behind her. The lady turned to him, and Helios said that her friends were looking for her in another part of the room. Suddenly, Thelma threw herself into His Highness's arms, and the surprised heir asked what she was doing. But the lady, without ceasing to cry and not letting go of the young man, ordered him to shut up and at least for that moment to be silent. The prince, seeing that the lady was sobbing, sighed in embarrassment and turned away but decided not to resist. At this time, the young sorceress was walking on the balcony located above the ballroom. She sighed wearily, realizing that this was the first time in a long time that she had interacted with so many people and that she was exhausted. However, looking at the joyful guests, she realized that she felt a pleasant, happy fatigue because she was glad that the ball was a great success. One lady, having smeared a little magic cream with the scent of jasmine on her hand, was amazed at how pleasant it smelled. Another lady with black hair asked if she could try it too, and the main character said she had a free sample she could give away. Celia smiled and admitted to the ladies that she was happy that she was able to give out free samples and that she was very nervous at first, but everything worked out. The witch remembered her husband and thought that it was all partly thanks to him. The princess immediately burst into loud laughter when she remembered Helios's advice about the imaginary circle that needed to be eaten. She thought about how she thought he was a cold person who didn't care about her, but it turned out he wasn't that bad. The lady briefly wondered if it was possible that everything would work out with him in this life, but she immediately decided that this was just stupidity, thinking that she needed to get some fresh air, otherwise she wouldn't have the strength to return to the guests. She opened the door to the balcony. But suddenly, before her eyes, she sees her husband, who is no less surprised by her appearance and who is in Thelma's arms. Embarrassed, Prince Helios turned around and looked at his wife, who had suddenly appeared. The man tried to say something to the girl with a trembling voice, but he couldn't explain anything, and Celia continued to look at him in bewilderment. The young heir wanted to hint to Thelma that she should finally let him go, but she only squeezed him even tighter in her arms. The main character calmly turned around and walked towards the exit, apologizing to the prince for disturbing him, but the young man asked her not to leave. The girl smiled sweetly at the guys and said that many people could come onto this balcony and advised the couple to change their hugging spot. Helios desperately reached out to his wife with his hand, but she added that Thelma, of course, was only a concubine, but it was better for them to avoid unnecessary rumors. Walking as if nothing had happened, the lady thinks that she hoped that they could at least appear as a couple, but apparently the concubine interests him more. She decides to continue her plan with the divorce. Meanwhile, the heir sharply and irritably pushed the annoying milady away from himself. The man hurried to the exit, but a saddened Thelma asked him if he would take Celia's side since he shouldn't be running after her. He was silent for a short time, but then replied that he did not want his wife to misunderstand him. The concubine sighed and then asked if he was going to trust some magician because this witch was the same as a murderer. Helios clenched his fist angrily and told the girl that he knew about her sad past. However, the young gentleman reminds the lady that both Siphos and Grimoire suffered in the war, and the people of both countries have suffered enough. His Highness frowned menacingly and looked closely at his hand, declaring that if the princess was a murderer, then so was he. The man added that to prevent war from happening again, countries must cooperate. But Thelma asked what he would do if his wife refused. More tears poured from Thelma's eyes when the prince replied that in that case, he would think of something himself. The next day, the main character arrived at an elite establishment and settled in the reception room to talk to its owner. The owner of the palace, a smiling man with black hair, told the lady that he was very glad that she had chosen his company to sell the products she had developed. The girl laughed and replied that the feeling was mutual and that she was glad to meet him since she had heard a lot about his company. The man was pleased by this and admitted that he should probably thank those who advertised him. George Stateria is a representative of the trading company Stateria. The company was engaged in the import of foreign goods but went bankrupt after 5 years. Before that, it was popular among the locals. Even after the business went into decline, some aristocrats tried to help the company's workers. Celia reasons that if she can get a contract with the company, she will be able to benefit greatly from it, so she is obliged to try. The protagonist got down to business and offered the director to listen to information about her products. The princess began to talk about her products, and the man thought about the fact that she was explaining very well, and it was obvious that she had spent time preparing. Looking at the girl, he understands that most of her goods meet the needs of aristocrats, but there is one nuance. She worked magic. The director, thinking that if he didn't mind it was worth a try, said that he agreed with her proposal and would buy 1 batch from her to begin with. But the sorceress suddenly sternly declared that he would buy from her not 1 but 1,000 lots at once, that is 100,000 pieces of goods. The confused head of the company asked why so many and whether she would even be able to prepare that much. Milady calmly replied that she couldn't do that much on her own, so she planned to order it from the mages at Grimoire. The man looked at the heroine in surprise and asked if she really wanted to do this. She laughed cheerfully and replied that everything was exactly like that, and together with other wizards she would be able to produce 100,000 units of goods. The lady explained that in this way his business and relationship with Grimoire would develop and their contract would be beneficial to both of them. The director calmly asked the young lady why she chose his company. The lady replied that it was all because even the imperial family itself trusted his company, so her choice was quite obvious. Celia added that in order to achieve her future goals, she sincerely hopes that they will collaborate. The man recalls a time when he was reading a newspaper and noticed something unusual about it. He sees an advert that the Crown Princess's new invention has attracted public attention. The advert shows a photograph of Celia. Now the director understands that in order to protect his company, he must bet everything on this girl. The gentleman tells the lady with a smile that he is ready to buy 1,000 lots from her. That evening, the main character spent time at her desk, where she usually conducted magical experiments. Holding a letter in her hands, she thinks that she should tell Helios about her meeting today just in case. However, the princess immediately remembers the moment when she caught him in the arms of his concubine. Then the lady decided that it would be better if she did not tell him everything, and it would be better for her to be polite because he was probably not interested. Then the young lady decides to read the letter from her father in which he responded to her business proposal. But suddenly Celia is shocked. Her father writes that he discussed the issue of producing her goods, but it will not be possible to gather so many magicians, so he asks for forgiveness for not being able to fulfill her request. The girl cannot believe what is happening. It turns out that she made a promise to the company in vain that she would stock up on a whole 100,000 units of goods. After some time, Prince Helios is shocked when his wife tells him that she will return to Grimoire. He asked if it was true, and she replied that it was because she wanted to go home for a short while, so she asked him for permission to do so for a week. At this moment, the man thinks that since his wife suddenly decided to return, she actually doesn't love him anymore and will leave forever. The butler, noticing the gentleman's confusion, wanted to say something, but he suddenly spoke to the lady. The young man, with frightening coolness, answered Celia that he gave her his permission and would go to Grimoire with her. The butler and the princess were stunned by Helios's decision. His Highness reasons that he must do everything to stop the girl before she seriously wants to return to her parents' house. Some time passed, and the carriage of Prince and Princess Cephos had already left for the neighboring country. The main character, looking at her husband, who also went with her, thinks that she will of course be under surveillance. However, the girl admits to herself that she did not think that he would personally go with her, and she is a little awkward, so she does not even know what to talk about with him. Suddenly, the moving carriage shook so much that the passenger herself shuddered, causing her surprised eyes to widen. The lady became embarrassed and covered her lips, thinking about what a bumpy road they were driving on. Here, the young gentleman spoke to the protagonist. He admitted that he was very sorry for what happened then at the ball. Celia tilted her head to the side in confusion, and the man said he meant the incident with Thelma. When Milady understood what he was talking about, she immediately remembered that moment and those hugs, but she herself believes that there is nothing to apologize for. There was no emotion on the lady's face, be it jealousy or disappointment, and she simply thought that she didn't care about it. Helios told his wife that during the war with Grimoire, Thelma lost her father, which is why she hates magic. The heroine was extremely stunned by this fact. Now she understood why she had not been able to instill a love for magic so easily. Then the prince spoke about the incident with the hug and explained that because Thelma felt sad when she remembered the past, this happened. Celia lowered her indifferent gaze and replied that she didn't really care, because this girl was just a concubine and there was nothing wrong with that. But then suddenly, the wheel of the calmly moving carriage hits another stone, causing it to shudder sharply. The girl even covered her mouth in surprise and thought that if this continued, she would definitely throw up. The lady began to sweat heavily and turned away from the prince because she felt ill. He, noticing the state of his wife, excitedly asked what had happened. The girl had already taken out her handkerchief but suddenly froze because Helios sat down next to her and, gently touching her hair, asked if she was okay. The man said that her face was too pale, and the slightly embarrassed heroine replied that she was fine. Then the young heir told Milady that if she looked out the window, she would not feel so sick. As soon as the sorceress looked out the window as the prince had advised her, she saw the most beautiful landscape. They were riding across a wide river similar to the sea, with waves sparkling in the sunlight. The lady smiled, thanked her husband, and said that she really did feel better. The heir nodded and said that next time they needed to design a cart that wouldn't shake, and promised his wife to give him all the necessary finances for this. Suddenly, Celia laughed and asked if that meant no one would be against the magic carriage, adding that it was no longer an invention. Helios asked the girl in surprise what she meant by the phrase, magic carriage. The princess smiled sweetly at him and said that he would be shocked when he saw them because they were 10 times faster than normal ones and could also fly. The couple spent the rest of the way to the Grimoire in a fascinating conversation where the lady told her husband interesting facts, and he was surprised by them every now and then. Very soon the prince and princess of Sifos reached the gates of the capital of Grimoire. Celia and Helios solemnly exited the carriage, where they were already met by joyful residents who were glad that the heroine had returned home. The protagonist was also happy to see her compatriots, so she waved and smiled at them cheerfully. Looking at his wife, the heir thinks that he never imagined that so many people would greet her, which means that she is very much loved here. However, at one point, the gentleman notices a certain man who looks at him with contempt because he is, after all, a prince from a country with which they had a war. The heir comes to the realization that this is exactly how Celia lived in his country, catching the contemptuous glances of those around her. Having greeted everyone, the sorceress invites her husband to go further and also asks if he will go with her to the appointed meeting with her father. The man calmly replied that of course he would go with her, while behind him a ball was flying out of the sky, heading straight towards them. As soon as Helios heard the whistle and noticed the danger, he immediately covered his wife with his body, having first ordered everyone to lie down on the ground. The shell landed near the prince and princess, and the impact sent shrapnel flying in all directions. The couple was not hurt in any way, but panic gripped the residents. Without letting go of his wife, the heir of Sifos shouted to everyone not to lose their vigilance, and most likely that this was a surprise attack. Celia was overcome with fear. She did not understand what kind of attack had begun in broad daylight, given that Grimoire was no longer at war with anyone. But suddenly, when the smoke from the impact cleared instead of some kind of bomb or catapult, people saw an ordinary man on the ground. An elderly man with a mustache lying on the ground said tiredly that the landing had been unsuccessful. It turned out that this was the main character's father. Celia rushed to help her relative irritably, asking what just happened. She extended her hand to her father, saying that he always did something dangerous. At that moment, the father remembered his daughter in early childhood. The man smiled and told his daughter that they had not seen each other for a long time, and he was happy that she had returned, and on this occasion he wanted to set off fireworks. The protagonist responded angrily that he should think about the amount of his magical power, and he scared her very much. Helios, watching his wife and father-in-law, remembers that he had once met Celia's father. It was on their wedding day, and then he had a completely different impression of him. The man tearfully asked his daughter not to be angry because he just wanted to make a surprise, but she replied that she was of course pleased, but it was too much. Sometime later, the main character and her husband were present in the reception hall, along with the king and queen of Grimoire. The sorceress thanked the rulers for agreeing to meet her, and the king replied that she did not need to thank them, and that they were also glad to see her. The gentleman asked the young lady if she had got used to life in Sifos, and she replied that she had and was keeping up a good sport there. Immediately after this, the witch smiled sarcastically because she decided not to say that she was planning to divorce the prince. The master suggested getting straight to the point and asked if she wanted to discuss the fact that she needed the power of their mages for her business. She said yes. The girl said that for some reason she had been refused, and the king, bowing his head gloomily, said that in fact everything was obvious if you take into account people's feelings. The man reminded the princess of the neighboring country that they had recently gone through a war and the poverty level was very high and some children would not live to see tomorrow. Sweat rolled down the lord's face and sorrow appeared in his eyes. He added that now their magician's labor would also be exploited. Celia froze in surprise because she immediately guessed that the man thought that this was not her personal request, but Sifos's demand. The king said that this was too outrageous, but the heroine asked him to wait and warned that this was not the demand of another country, but her personal one. His Majesty raised his surprised gaze to the girl and asked if this was true. The lady said that it was so, and she had no intention of exploiting the labor of others. The king did not answer the sorceress, but only bowed his head, helplessly. The protagonist understands that he is worried and does not want people to suffer anymore, so she is afraid to start something new. However, Celia firmly asked His Highness to raise his head and look at her, which he did. She says she understands his desire to listen to his people, but if things continue this way, their country will only decline. Madame also explained to the king that if they could create a business where magicians could work, then people's income would increase and the problem of poverty would be solved. The country would be able to return to the old days. Putting her hand to her chest, Celia asked the man to help her for the sake of the future of the Grimoire. His Majesty's face showed surprise, and he replied that there seemed to be a misunderstanding. The king apologized for his rudeness to Celia and Prince Cephos, but the latter calmly replied that he had nothing to apologize for, as he understood their feelings. The ruler smiled and confessed to the sorceress that he was glad that he was able to talk to her, and thanks to this he felt a little better. The master told Celia that she had always helped them, so he would talk to the magicians, and he was sure that they would agree to cooperate. Hearing this, the main character felt a pleasant warmth and relief which made her smile tenderly. Evening came, and the princess, combing her hair before going to bed, thought that she was glad that His Majesty would be able to explain everything to the magicians. She also reflects that her father seems to be doing well as before, and she did not expect to be received so warmly here, but there is only one thing that bothers her. She will have to live with Helios in the same room for some time. The lady does not understand who decided to play a joke on them like that. The girl casually recalled the words of her father, who, winking slyly, advised the newlyweds to allocate one common room. The young heir turned to his wife and said that he would sleep on the sofa and she could sleep on the bed. But the girl, thoughtfully putting the comb back in place, replied that she did not agree with this because she could not allow the prince to sleep on the sofa. It did not look very good. Milady, climbing onto the bed, added that she was not against them sleeping together in the same bed. The man was a little shy, so he answered his wife with a simple, "I understand." Celia and Helios lay down together on the same bed, but with their backs to each other. But no matter how hard the girl tries, she cannot close her eyes. She is haunted by the thought that this is in fact the first time they are sleeping together. As it turned out, the prince also could not fall asleep as he was troubled by the same thought. Embarrassed that this was the first night they would sleep in the same bed, the sorceress and the heir blushed and fell silent. Celia closed her eyes and mentally ordered herself not to pay attention to it and to fall asleep quickly, but then her husband quietly called out to her. The young man asked his wife if she would start selling her magic cream if everything went well. She, without thinking to turn to her interlocutor, answered that everything was correct, and Helios answered with an embarrassed, "I see." Suddenly, the heroine hears from her husband that if he can help her with something, then she should not be shy about asking him for help, and if necessary, he can increase funding for her research. The lady thanked him, but closing her eyes assumed that he was saying this because she wanted to divorce him. But the girl didn't care. Then Helios, sweating a little from excitement, asked his wife if they could take their time with the divorce. The man wanted to tell the heroine something important, but suddenly heard Celia snoring. He turned around, looked at the blonde, and realized that she had fallen asleep. The heir sat up in bed and thought that she had been very busy lately, so she quickly fell asleep. Gently touching the sleeping princess, the gentleman realized that he wanted to understand what she was feeling, but the thought of divorce terribly frightened him. Before falling asleep, the prince looked at the sorceress for a short time with a heavy, tired gaze, wondering what he should do. It was morning in Grimoire, and Helios woke up feeling a strange tickling sensation on his face. But when he opened his eyes completely, he realized that Celia was lying a couple of centimeters away from him, and the girl's wheat-colored hair was spread out all over the pillow. The man was immediately surprised and thought about it causing beads of sweat to run down his face and neck. The girl instantly woke up and was no less shocked. The lady immediately turned away, asked for forgiveness, and said that it was an accident, and the prince grabbed his head and replied that it was his own fault. The main character's cheeks turned red and she wondered what she was doing. Now she thinks that her husband will definitely hate her because of this. However, Celia, remembering the expression on the prince's face when she first woke up, thought that he did not look as if he objected. Sometime later, the sorceress was present at an important meeting where one of the magicians wanted to ask her for forgiveness again, but on their behalf. The princess replied smilingly that they did not need to apologize, and that she understood their feelings perfectly well. The magicians were very touched by this and thanked the girl. They promised that they would do their best to help her with the orders. Celia smiled and thanked her colleagues for their responsiveness and cooperation. The silent Helios is watching the meeting, and when the organizer suggested getting down to business, suddenly another magician entered the room who was in a hurry to get to the conference and apologized for being late. The heroine was delighted when she saw a man named Russell. She said that she had been waiting for him, and he admitted that he had been detained by children in the city. The witch decided to introduce her friend to her husband, and said that Count Russell Avenel was one of the magicians who would participate in her project. The wizard told the prince that it was an honor to meet him, and he calmly replied that he was also glad to meet them. After this, the Count, squeezing his friend's hands in, declared that he had been very much looking forward to the day when they would meet again, and was glad that everything was fine with her now. The princess blushed and admitted with a smile that she too was glad that he was doing well. The girl invites her friend to come to the table since they need to continue the conversation, to which he readily agrees. Helios has been keeping a close eye on this pair of friends for the last few minutes, not understanding what this strange feeling is that is arising in his soul. After the conference, Celia and Russell were walking down the hallway, where the man tells Milady that thanks to her, the condition of their people began to improve. The mage also said that he was worried about the fact that there was no news about her, to which the heiress admitted that she wanted the grimoire to prosper. The lady says that she wants the landscape of her beautiful country to remain unchanged, and when she thinks about her homeland, she is filled with hope, which she wants to give to others. Earl Russell's eyes filled with tears from the girl's sincere desire to make her country a better place, and he called out to his friend in a respectful manner. The princess sighed and told the magician that no one could hear them, so he could stop talking to her so respectfully. He smiled happily and agreed with the lady, after which he congratulated Celia on her return to her homeland. Since childhood, Russell was the one who always took Celia's side, and in her past life she was unable to meet him after the wedding. A crystal tear rolled down Her Highness's face at the thought that she thought she would never see him again. The wizard, noticing that the lady had started crying excitedly, asked what had happened, but she smiled and said that she was fine and was simply overcome with nostalgia. Suddenly, the Count grabbed his friend by the waist from behind and pressed her to himself, gently touching her eyelashes, saying that he was very worried about her. The girl smiled and told her friend that he was always so worried about her, but she convinced him that everything would be fine with her and that she would cope. Suddenly, Helios appeared next to the hugging friends, called out to his wife, and said that he had been looking for her for a long time. The prince, placing his hand on his wife's shoulder, confessed to the wizard that he wanted to personally thank him for agreeing to help his wife, and he would continue to hope for his cooperation. The mage's face showed slight confusion, but he replied that he was only too happy to help her. The young heir invited the sorceress to go with him, to which she agreed. The main character waved sweetly at her friend and promised that they would meet next time. Russell said nothing to the lady. Celia left in a hurry, with her husband leaving her friend alone with himself. The prince and princess had already moved away from the magician, and the sorceress excitedly called out to her husband, hinting that he was still leading her, holding her hand tightly. He immediately realized that he had made a mistake, and immediately let go of the girl's hand. The gentleman sheepishly asked his lady for forgiveness, and she modestly replied that he did not need to apologize. Helios, remembering how Celia and Russell flirted with each other, thinks that he could not restrain himself then and ended up going after his wife. He, sadly bowing his head down, asked the girl if she was going to return to Sifos. She, perplexed by such a question, replied that of course she would return, since she had already said that they had only come here for 1 week. The man was surprised by her words but did not show it. He immediately reminded his wife that when they divorced, she would not return to Sifos. The main character thought about the fact that before her original goal was indeed divorce, but now the desire to save her homeland is stronger. The lady looked away in embarrassment and told the prince that she had not yet given up on the idea of a divorce, but that the last days she had spent with him did not seem so disgusting to her. His Highness's eyes widened when he heard these words from his wife, but he did not show any particular sign of it. The man confessed to the lady that he and she had been having a lot of fun the last few days, then apologized for everything she said, that at least she had begun to be heard a little. It turns out that while the couple were chatting sweetly, Russell, lurking around the corner, was watching them the whole time. He smiled sarcastically when he heard about the divorce. Very quickly, night fell in Grimoire, and thousands of bright stars appeared in the clear blue sky. Prince Helios was just walking along the corridor minding his own business, but suddenly Russell came up behind him and called out to him. The Count, with a strange smile on his face, asked the gentleman if it was true that this night was wonderful. The heir asked the unexpected guest what he wanted to tell him, and he replied that he simply wanted to talk to him alone. The wizard asked if he could spare some of his time, to which he only stared at him in surprise and remained silent. Finally, the prince agreed and asked what he wanted to talk about. The Count, smiling venomously, replied that he would like to discuss his divorce from Celia. Helios was so surprised by this that he trembled slightly. He frowned in bewilderment, wanting to ask the sorcerer how he had even found out about this. Russell, with the same smile slowly approaching, His Highness began to talk about how since childhood Celia had trusted only him. The wizard approached the young gentleman and added mockingly that, for example, he knew that he was not communicating well with her. Helios began to reason that if you think about it, he really had been a so-so husband and an irresponsible person all this time, but now the man admits that he really wants them to be together. The heir remembered the moment when Celia told him that the last days spent with him did not seem so disgusting to her. The young man said something to Russell that impressed him. Their relationship had been getting better lately. The Count sighed mockingly and replied that the whole point was that Celia was simply very cautious. He added that in Sifos she had nothing but enemies around her, and she could not remain alone in such a country where she had not a single friend. Helios wanted to object, but the sorcerer interrupted him and told the prince that if he had not even noticed this, then he was not destined to make her happy. Russell managed to touch that very string of His Highness, from which he shuddered and his gaze faded. The prince modestly told the Count that he allowed himself too much. The magician confidently bypassed his opponent and asked with a smile who Celia would choose. Then Avino suggests making a bet on this matter. The sorcerer tells the master that they will give gifts to the princess, and she will have to choose the one she likes best. Russell added that if the girl chooses his gift, he will take her back to Grimoire. Hearing this, Helios froze in horror, not believing that this could really happen. The puzzled prince wanted to say that he would never agree to such a thing, but Russell said that if he truly loved his wife, he would easily win. The heir nervously clenched his fist and thought that he really loved Celia, and his feelings were not false. His Highness sternly replied to his opponent that he would emerge victorious from this bet. Russell didn't answer the man, only a sly smile appeared on his face. The heroine and Helios lay down on the bed to fall asleep together. The lady decided to tell about how tomorrow she would prepare the cream together with the Grimoire mages. But suddenly the girl looked at the prince, who did not answer her in any way, and irritably asked if he was listening to her at all. At this point, the heir is diligently reflecting on the fact that he agreed to the bet, but does not even imagine how he can please his wife. He remembers that Celia often decorates her room with flowers, but he thinks that such a gift would be too banal. Then the gentleman began to think about whether it was worth giving the sorceress a more spacious laboratory. But suddenly, the man remembered that his wife loved tea very much, and he could give her his tea plantation. His Highness thought this idea was quite good, but he immediately imagined how his butler would react to it. He would advise him to refuse. Celia nudged her husband on the shoulder and called out to him, and he asked the girl again. She said, offended, that she knew he wasn't listening to her. The princess pouted and turned away from her husband, asking him to listen carefully next time because she didn't like to repeat herself twice. Helios thought he had been so focused on the bet that he had missed something more important. He sheepishly apologized to his wife and asked her to tell him again. Dissatisfied, Celia turned back to the man but warned that she would only repeat it once. Helios agreed with a smile, thinking that now he would listen to his wife and think about the gift tomorrow. The next day, the main character began her work as usual. But while she was giving instructions to the magicians, she noticed the prince, who called her. When the girl approached her husband, he handed her a beautiful bouquet of flowers. The lady immediately admired the beauty of the gift and thanked her suitor. However, Celia made the already shy Helios even more embarrassed when she said that she didn't have a suitable vase in her lab. Suddenly, Russell appears next to the heir of Sifos, who says that it is better not to bring flowers to the lab as they spread pollen. A couple of hours later, His Highness again decided to make a gift for his beloved, and when she was talking with her magician friend on the street, he called out to her, The man presenting his wife with a prepared basket of food says that the weather is great today and suggests having a picnic together, but as soon as Helios voiced his proposal, a torrential rain began to fall out of nowhere. The wizard smiled suspiciously and waved his finger as if hinting to his opponent that he might catch a cold if he continued to stand there and get wet. And the prince, soaking wet, looked at the magician with an incredibly fierce gaze, as if asking if this was his doing. Russell wanted to invite his friend to have lunch together at a restaurant since the weather had gotten so bad, but she unexpectedly rushed to her husband. Celia, using her magic to stop the rain above the heir's head, insistently asked him not to stand in the rain for so long because he might catch a cold. She, surprised by how unexpectedly the downpour had started, told her husband to quickly go home with her, and he agreed, apologizing just in case. The girl gently took His Highness by the hand to lead him towards the palace. The Count's mood instantly worsened. He clenched his teeth in irritation as he watched this scene. Sometime later, Celia was talking at the same table with Russell, while Helios stood quietly to the side and watched them. The heir of Cephos folded his arms menacingly across his chest reflects on the fact that his wife, of course, was concerned, and took care of him, but in the end he still couldn't think of what to give her. The heroine's friend, seeing the confusion on Helios's face, smiled like a fox. Then the magician wanted to offer the sorceress something interesting that he had planned for that evening, but she suddenly jumped up from her seat and called out to her husband in a stern voice. But there was no trace of the girl's aggression left when she turned to the prince and kindly asked him if he could spare her 1 minute. He was confused by such suddenness, but he agreed and followed Celia into the corridor. Meanwhile, the emotion on the face of the magician who was staring at the couple showed obvious displeasure. He doesn't understand where they went. Walking along the corridor, Helios decided to ask the lady what she wanted to tell him. But suddenly, the protagonist, looking at her husband with a look full of anger and irritation, asked him to stop it. The girl pointed to the man's forehead and said that if he frowned like that, he would get wrinkles, and if something was bothering him, he should say so. The lady folded her hands seriously and added that when his face looked so gloomy, people thought he was angry. Helios fell silent and wondered if he should tell Celia about his problem, because if he told the truth, she would definitely not be delighted. The prince replied that at that moment he was simply deep in thought, and the sorceress looked at him in bewilderment. The main character's face immediately showed disappointment when His Highness said that he still didn't want to worry her over trifles and that it was only his problem. The lady turned away pointedly and said that she thought he would tell her, but in the end she had wasted her time and would therefore go back to the lab. When Madame actually began to leave her husband, Helios called out to her in surprise. The thought immediately pops into Helios's mind that this had happened before. He had once heard his wife say that he was bothering her. But suddenly the girl froze because the prince suddenly confessed that he had made a bet with Count Russell. The princess turned around in bewilderment and asked the man what he was talking about. The gentleman explained that the gist of it was that they had to choose a gift for her, and she would have to choose the one she liked best. At the moment when he admitted that he had been hesitant to choose a gift for a long time, Celia remembered how he wanted to invite her to a picnic, but got wet in the rain. The sorceress also understood why he had recently stood there deep in thought, frowning so terribly that he had frightened people. The protagonist suddenly said words that made Helios tremble. Madame declared that she didn't need any gifts from them. The pleased princess added that if she wanted something, she would get it with her own hands, and they also decided to make some kind of bet. However, the lady shyly admitted that the bouquet he gave her recently was very beautiful. The girl also admitted that she was touched by the fact that he remembered which flowers were her favorite, namely gerberas. And the witch also says that she noticed the care with which he selected treats for the picnic. Everything in the basket looked very tasty. However, the girl told her husband that it was definitely not worth competing over this. The next moment, Celia said something that made Helios freeze in amazement. She said that he had begun to understand her better even without this bet. The man realized what was going on, which made the princess smile. Then the girl suggested that her husband go back to the lab. But suddenly the gentleman declared that he would not go with her and would return to his room. The sorceress asked him in bewilderment why he explained that he doubted that the magicians would be able to work in his presence. The girl indignantly asked what he was saying and objected that his presence there would on the contrary be useful. The prince looked at his wife with puzzlement and asked why she thought so. She explained that everyone in her home country was accustomed to magic, so the opinion of someone who hadn't seen it yet was extremely important. The sorceress added that since he came here, it could have a positive effect on the restoration of diplomatic relations. Helios reminded the girl that he was a prince from a neighboring country that had been at war with them, and he did not believe that any kind of restoration was possible. The lady replied that that was the point, that he was the Prince of Siphos trying to understand what magic was. That way people could see that he was interested in it. And if the prince continues to do this, then the mages from Grimoire will begin to think that he is not the only one, and that there are also those in Siphos who are interested in this. The heroine explained that this is a small step, which is like a flower sprouting after winter, which will lead them to dawn and a happy future. The young gentleman replied that it was very cool and admitted that he himself had not thought about it. The protagonist, looking at her husband, thought about the fact that he had not previously been the kind of person who could listen to her so attentively. Before, he would constantly lock her in the castle and just continue to ignore her. That's why Celia hated him and planned a divorce. But Milady realized that now her husband had become somehow different. He now cares about her, and it seems that these are his sincere feelings, and before he simply did not know how to express his thoughts correctly. Celia, with a smile on her face, told Helios that he was actually a very kind person, and she was sure that everyone would soon understand this. The heir was so surprised that he couldn't keep his mouth shut, but then he remembered that something similar had already happened to him and his wife. When they were in their 6th month of marriage, in one of their duels, the prince received many wounds and the princess helped him treat his wounds. Suddenly, when the girl was healing the man with magic by touching his hand, the heir abruptly pulled it away and said that was enough. He declared that he did not need any more treatment and that Celia should not touch his hand, which had destroyed so many lives. But she suddenly grabbed his hand again and objected that this was not at all the case. The girl put the man's hand to her cheek and said that she saw the hands of a kind and gentle man who was trying to protect what was dear to him. The heir of Siphos recalls that when he first killed a man, he thought that he would never be the same again, because with his own hands he took lives from people. But to his surprise, the protagonist, on the contrary, said that he had the hands of a kind person. A soft smile appeared on Helios's face as Celia's words essentially saved him again. He looked at his wife with a sincere, happy look, thanked her, and said that he loved her very much with all his heart. The main character's face immediately flushed, and she awkwardly fell silent. The girl turned away, covering her face with her hands, and the prince, deciding that he had said something strange again, apologized. She said that there was nothing strange about it. Suddenly, the romantic moment of the young couple was interrupted by someone appearing from behind. The unexpected guest called out to Celia. It turned out to be the princess's father, who this time for some reason was not so smiling. Helios, seeing him, wanted to tell him about the event that happened yesterday, but he completely ignored him, silently passing by him. Leaving the heir of Siphos completely bewildered, the man approached his daughter, who asked him what had happened. The father, excitedly touching the girl's shoulder, insistently asked her to get a divorce immediately and return to Grimoire forever. The young gentleman, hearing this, immediately turned around and looked at his wife's father, and the sorceress, in shock, was unable to utter a word. The next moment, the father looked angrily at Helios, hiding his daughter behind his back, who was trying to figure out what had suddenly come over him. It was impossible to describe the surprise the prince felt when he heard from the man that Celia no longer needed to be near him. Russell had been watching the whole confusion from behind a nearby wall, and he heard Celia's father tell His Highness that he knew his daughter was being mistreated in Siphos. A feeling of excitement immediately flared up in Helios's soul, and he asked the man who had told him this. He replied that Russell had told him this, and he believed him otherwise. Why would the sorceress have told him that she wanted to divorce her husband? The heroine wanted to object, but the gentleman said that on the day they arrived at Grimoire, he saw how upset his daughter was by her communication with her husband. The protagonist was stunned by this because she guessed that her father was talking about the time when she got sick in the carriage, which is why she looked so bad. But to the girl's surprise, her husband, instead of simply denying it, looked sadly at the floor and apologized for allegedly not watching enough. Then the witch decided to tell her father that it was not Helios who was to blame for her poor health, but that she had gotten a little sick on the road. But the man sternly asked his daughter why the prince forbade her to use magic if he really cared about her. The lady suddenly fell silent because she felt anxious, which made all her words get confused, and she was unable to answer properly. But then Helios intervened in the conversation and finally admitted to the man that he did this because he was worried about his wife. The young gentleman added that he did not want his dear wife to suffer from something dangerous, but in the end he only made things worse. At the end of his heartfelt confession, the prince bowed his head to Celia and her father and asked for their forgiveness. The sorceress was very surprised by this, and she also came to the realization that everything her husband did was because he was simply afraid for her. The girl, grabbing her father by the hands, told him that their cooperation in her business was not in vain. Helios supported her endeavors. The main character persistently asked her father to stop accusing her husband of treating her meanly. Mr. Helios was very stunned when he realized how things really were. The man apologized to his daughter for everything and said that it seemed like there had been a misunderstanding, while Russell, hiding behind the wall, gritted his teeth. The young magician was so disgusted to hear this that his hand, trembling with anger, clenched into a fist. He, daring to come out of the shadows, declared in front of everyone that this was not a misunderstanding. Celia, very surprised by the unexpected appearance of her friend, wanted to ask where he came from. But the wizard interrupted her, telling his friend that he had heard everything they had talked about and knew that she wanted to earn money to divorce her husband. Russell admits that 2 knights of Sifos, whose conversation he also overheard, spoke about this. The knights discussed the latest news about the useless princess who had recently appeared in public. The count smiled sarcastically as he told everyone that these people called Celia useless, and they were complete idiots if they thought so. Based on this, the wizard concluded that he did not believe that everything was fine in his girlfriend's life. Unexpectedly, he came closer to the heroine and, putting his hands on her shoulders, asked how she was doing in another country. But the girl could not answer as she felt some fear and anxiety. Russell continued to question his friend. He asked if it was true that she wanted to file for divorce for a reason. The man said that she could stop suffering because he would do everything to save her and so that she would never suffer again. At this time, the anxiety in Celia's soul grew even stronger, so she could not answer her friend, but only looked fearfully into his eyes. The protagonist's father sighed wearily and said that his guesses turned out to be true after all. Confused, Helios wanted to say something to his wife, but his father interrupted him and said that he was no longer going to talk to him about anything. Mr. Helios stated in all seriousness that he was taking away his only and beloved daughter. Several hours passed after these events, and a round moon rose in the dark sky. Celia lay down on her bed to fall asleep, but she can't do it because of the endless stream of thoughts that won't leave her head. The girl, thinking about what happened today, was amazed that she and Helios were now sleeping in different beds because of this, although the girl's face remained the same, unperturbed due to terrible fatigue. Remembering how Russell promised to save her, the lady realizes that she doesn't want her past life to repeat itself, which is why she wanted a divorce so badly. The sorceress, turning her face to the side, hoped to see Helios there next to her, who was also sleeping with her. But this was only an imaginary picture of what she wanted to see, and in reality, she was all alone. Burying herself under the blanket, Celia thinks that she was given as a wife to the Prince of Sifos so as not to pay money, and until she earns it, she will not be able to return. Curled up like a kitten, she reasons that her father isn't saying this, but he must understand. She just needs to wait and give him time. The next day, the heroine, walking along the corridor, met a maid whom she asked if her father was inside, and she replied that yes, and he was waiting for her. The sorceress wanted to go, but her subordinate stopped her and excitedly asked how she felt because her complexion was not very healthy. The girl, smiling uncharacteristically, replied that she had simply slept poorly, which only made the maid even more worried. Suddenly, Mary brought her palms closer to the princess's face, apologizing in advance for what she was going to do to her. The young lady closed her eyes, after which a bright, magical glow appeared near her forehead, making her face look much fresher. Opening her eyes, she said that she now felt much better, and there was no trace left of her sleepiness. The maid, showing Her Highness her magic pendant, said that the magicians had created this prototype in the laboratory and let her try it out. The girl boasted that even someone like her can use it, and with the help of this magical decoration, you can relieve drowsiness. But suddenly something happens that the two young ladies could not have expected. A loud explosion is heard a few meters away from them and a huge flame flares up. A stunned Celia and Mary turned towards the sound, confused at what had just happened. Then Helios hurries to the girls with his knight, who asked his wife if she was okay. Coming closer, the worried man repeated his question, and the sorceress answered in a trembling voice that no, but that was not at all important now. The prince, the main character, and the maid witnessed the scene where wounded people were being taken out of the burning part of the palace. Celia, deciding that action was needed, ordered the maid to gather the mages who could put out the fire and find those who could help the victims. She resolutely said that she would carry out the order. The heir of Cephos, meanwhile, ordered his subordinate to gather the knights, and he accepted the order. More and more wounded men and women began to emerge from the fire, and Helios, who seemed to have no sense of fear, headed towards the fire. He looked into the burning room and covered his nose with his sleeve for safety, and realized that there were still people left at the site of the explosion. The protagonist, looking at the flames spreading stronger and stronger, realized that there was no time to wait for the knights. The girl, having ordered everyone to leave, quickly decided to act and with the help of magic created a protective halo that began to prevent the spread of fire. However, Helios, abruptly heading straight towards the source of the explosion, told his wife that she too had better evacuate the building. The frightened sorceress screamed and begged her husband to stop and come back. But he seemed not to hear her and continued to walk forward as if there was not a drop of fear left in him, despite the fact that Celia did not stop calling him. The prince, quickly making his way through the magical fire, is amazed at how intense the heat is in this place. Suddenly he ran to the room in which the fire had broken out and saw a magician running out of there, which is why he realized that there were still people left there. Above the door of the burning room, there was a sign that said, "Central Laboratory" and "Entry for Employees Only." In this laboratory, there is a certain glowing stone of enormous size, and the young gentleman has no idea at all about what kind of room this is. The main character's father and Russell are in the burning room. The latter is unfortunately crushed by debris, and the Count tries to pull him out with the help of magic. The sweaty man says that things are bad because advanced fire magic was used for the fire, and you need to be a great magician to put it out. The hopeless Count told the Duke not to worry about her and to quickly leave this place without him. But he said that he couldn't leave it, especially since the exit was blocked by debris. Russell, gritting his teeth in unbearable pain, said that if he used his remaining magical power, he could clear the way for him. But Celia's father said that this was a bad idea because if he did it, he himself would not be able to get out. The wizard admitted that he did not want Celia to lose someone dear to her. Because of this, he desperately asked the Duke to leave and leave him here to his fate. Suddenly, an incredibly strong man knocks down the door to the room, which was already filled with debris. The stunned Duke and the magician looked towards the exit and saw Prince Helios appear there. The young heir ran up to Celia's father and asked him if he was okay, and he replied that he was, but he might not say the same about his friend. His Highness told the man that he had cleared the exit, so he needed to leave quickly. But the main character's father said that it was dangerous to stay here and he should leave too. But Helios, ignoring him, headed towards Russell, who was crushed by the debris. The heir of Cephos began to free the magician, removing huge piles of stone from his body, but he oddly enough was very surprised by this. The Count asked the gentleman in bewilderment what he was doing, after which he asked him to leave him there and quickly leave with the Duke. But Helios, continuing to clear away the rubble, replied that he couldn't just leave it there. Russell, his head bowed in defeat and his teeth clenched in anger, wondered why his opponent was so eager to help him. In the end, he shouted to the prince that he could not allow himself to be saved. He was completely tormented by his sense of pride. The wizard, closing his eyes as if already resigned to his fate, told the heir at last that he was leaving Celia to him. But suddenly, Helios, holding a piece of the wall with one hand and grabbing the victim with the other, angrily ordered Russell to shut up. The magician did not expect such a turn of events, so he looked into Helios's face with his mouth open. His Highness asked what the hell pride there could be if he also wanted to make Celia happy, and he was also a dear person to her. Before Russell could answer, a terrible roar was heard, which made the prince realize that they had little time left. Then something unimaginable happens. Helios, throwing the Duke over one shoulder, and the exhausted wizard over the other, rushed to the exit. The magician at this moment thinks about the fact that at that time his friend defended her husband, so he had to show up and answer because he was thinking how she could defend someone she wanted to divorce. Russell felt so bad his face twisted, as if he had tasted a lemon. He realized that the Prince of Sifos had been worthy of Celia from the very beginning. Very quickly, Prince Helios carried the victims to a safe place, to the street where the main character was already waiting for them. The princess, as soon as she saw Helios, immediately screamed his name desperately and rushed towards him. The girl hugged her dad, her friend, and her husband at once, tearfully saying that she was very glad that everything worked out and they remained alive. Helios was very pleased to feel his wife's love and excitement, so a soft smile appeared on his face. The sorceress, wiping tears from her eyes, asked the men to show her their wounds so that she could heal them. The prince said that he was fine, but those he brought were not feeling well. But then Russell approached the gentleman and told him that Celia was a great magician, and he should see her in action at least once. In response to this, he simply remained silent and only looked at his friend in bewilderment. Russell, Helios, and the Duke crouched on the ground, and the protagonist created a large magical halo. Thanks to the girl's magic, the wounds on the body of the heir of Sifos and on other men began to heal quickly. The young prince's eyes lit up from what he saw. The man sincerely said that Celia's magic was very beautiful. The count smiled and told the gentleman that her magic was the most beautiful in the entire grimoire. He thoughtfully admitted that he hadn't even thought about it. The magician agreed with him, then added that he had lost to him there. The prince angrily asked what that meant. The sorcerer laughed and said that he was just joking, after which he sincerely thanked his friend for saving him and promised that he would never forget it. Helios did not answer but only showed the count his joyful smile. But suddenly, the young gentleman thought about something and said that all the ready-made creams and the ingredients for its creation had burned to the ground. The prince asked his wife if they would stop production for a while. Celia replied that everything was fine because she had some ingredients left that she kept in stock, and if they started production now, they could make it on time. But then suddenly, a woman runs up to the married couple and tells them of trouble. There was also a fire in the warehouse. Stunned, Celia and Helios both screamed and asked their aunt what she had said. Very quickly, the princess, along with her family servants and the injured magicians, came to the warehouse from which only ashes remained. The main character, looking at the charred debris, excitedly says that it was definitely arson because everything looks too suspicious. Russell asked his friend who could use such powerful magic, which was not weaker than even her magic. The girl agreed, but added that if you use the magic amplification stones from the central laboratory, even an ordinary magician can strengthen his spells. Suddenly, Helios's memory flashes back to the moment when he saw a magician running out of a littered room who seemed suspicious to him. The prince, pointing his finger at the suspect who was in the crowd next to them, says that he saw this magician running out of the laboratory. This same wizard first shuddered with fear, but then furiously declared that they were accusing him without any evidence. But the heir of Sifos replied that he did not want him to misunderstand him, and only wanted to know if he had seen anything. The suspected wizard shouted out that no, because he ran from there as best he could to survive in that fire. But His Highness was not going to just leave the magician alone. He calmly asked what he was doing in the central laboratory. Then, the young man began to nervously prove to Helios that he was wrong and that he did not go into the central laboratory but simply passed by. The magician added that no matter how he justified himself, he would still be suspected, to which the prince said that he did not doubt the innocence of people with an alibi. But the heir says that if someone destroyed all the efforts of Celia and other magicians, and therefore the man asks for help from the wizard to reveal the truth. The suspect became even more nervous and replied that he was very sorry, but he had nothing to tell. After this, the magician decided to leave quickly, but suddenly someone deftly grabbed him by the wrist. It turned out to be Russell, who, judging by his expression, was unhappy with what was happening. The count tells the young man that they found a fragment of a stone in the central laboratory to enhance magical power. He also explained that he kept it a secret from everyone, but it had a special spell placed on it, and the stone could only react to the person who had recently used it. The suspected wizard's face immediately showed fear when Russell asked him to hold the stone in his hand before leaving. As soon as the stone of enhancing magical power was in the guy's hand, it immediately lit up with a bright blue color. Avenel looked down in disappointment, sighed, and calmly asked the wizard to explain. The culprit of the incident, sweating from fear, admitted that he had set the fire because he did not want them to help the murderers who had destroyed their homeland. Celia's father, frowning angrily, asked the magician what he himself was going to do and how he was better than the murderer. The criminal began to tremble and sweat even more when the man added that it was unforgivable. The enraged duke took the instigator of the fire away with him, and Helios wanted to say something to him but could not. The main character, along with her maid, her husband, and a team of magicians, were clearing away the rubble after a fire. Here the maid told the young lady that she had found something interesting: the last bottle for making cream. Celia sadly noted that this discovery would not make things any easier for them, and even if they ordered everything they needed now, it would not arrive in a month. The prince noticed something interesting about the girls, leaned over to them, and asked what they had found. The protagonist replied that it was a bottle of birch sap from Siphos, and she uses it in her cream as a moisturizing ingredient. The princess says that the cream is specially created for clients from Siphos because their skin is not resistant to magic. The lady added that in fact it contains only plant-based ingredients, but she increases their effectiveness with magic so the finished cream turns out better than others. The heir of Siphos thought about this and asked if he understood correctly that without birch sap the cream would not turn out as it should. The heroine replied that everything was true and that it would be difficult to restore production. Celia reasons that she already has an order from the aristocracy, and if they don't meet the deadline, she will lose their trust. The girl froze like a statue, thinking that she needed to come up with some kind of alternative. While pondering her problem, the princess suddenly notices a beautiful yellow flower next to her, which survived despite the fire. The protagonist jumped to her feet joyfully and exclaimed that she had found a dandelion that had survived the incident. She stroked him tenderly, praising him for what a resilient little flower he was. But suddenly the young lady fell silent because an interesting idea came into her head. The girl happily turned to her friends and said that they could use this flower. Helios and the maid shook their heads in bewilderment and asked what flower she meant. Celia said that in her homeland this plant is called the pearl flower, and it only grows in the climate of Grimoire. When these flowers bloom, they can be used to make high-quality aromatic oil, which was popular with aristocrats from other countries, and it is also an excellent moisturizing material. The princess, beaming with joy, said that if they contacted the flower girl, Sarah Margaret, they could purchase these pearl flowers from her. But then Russell, after thinking for a moment, told his friend that he didn't know any Sarah Margaret. The heroine was extremely embarrassed and replied that she had only recently found out about it. In her mind, the girl thought that it was not surprising that no one knew Sarah since she was only 15 years old now. After some time, the protagonist, along with her husband, maid, and guard, arrived at Margaret's garden where they were walking with its owner. However, the simple gardener, smiling shyly at the honored guests, does not understand why the princess and the prince suddenly came to her. Celia, looking at the beautiful flowers that Sarah grew, says that she takes very good care of them, and they look just wonderful. The girl thanked the lady for the compliment, but thinks that she still feels awkward and scared. But still looking at Helios's gloomy face, Milady realized that his presence made her even more afraid. Margaret subsequently gave the newlyweds a tour of her flower gardens, but suddenly she stopped because Celia asked her if she lived there alone. She was covered in sweat from excitement, but replied that yes, she lived in this house herself. Then the princess asked about her parents, and the gardener said that her mother had died of illness and her father had died in the war. Margaret, looking at her graceful flower fields, admitted that these gardens were a memory of them. Suddenly, the main character felt guilty and apologized to Sarah for reminding her of something sad, but the gardener suddenly became embarrassed because she thought that she shouldn't have talked so much about herself in the presence of high-ranking officials because it was rude. She also noticed the evil look Helios gave his wife and was convinced that he definitely hated her. Sarah thinks that His Highness might not like the fact that Celia dragged him here after all he is from a former enemy country. Milady thought about this so much that she left the guests stupefied. The protagonist decided to ask the flower girl if she had any problems with such a large flower field. She replied that the local baron was helping her, so she had no problems. Margaret, with a flutter in her heart, shared with Celia that he had recently even invited her to dinner. And the heroine, listening to her story, thought that she was worried about the fact that she was working alone, but it seemed that this man favored her and there was nothing to worry about. But suddenly, Margaret spoke of something she had forgotten to tell them, and then the princess drove her thoughts away and turned her attention to her. The gardener asked the gentleman if they would like to look at the pearl flowers that would soon need to be picked. Celia, with sparkles in her eyes, replied that she would very much like to see them. Then Sarah smilingly asked the lady to follow her, and they would come to the right place. However, before the flower girl had even taken 3 steps, she had covered her entire boot in mud after stepping into a puddle. Milady was immediately seized with panic because she had brought Madame Celia to a place where she could easily get dirty. But while the girl was lost in her anxious thoughts, she suddenly heard behind her the indignant cries of the princess addressed to the prince. Turning around, Sarah saw Celia in Helios's arms, who was shyly asking him to let her down, saying that she could walk on her own. The gardener was so surprised by this sight that she cried out in bewilderment and blushed. His Majesty, calmly looking his wife straight in the eyes, said that he would not allow his beloved wife to stain his expensive clothes. At that moment, Sarah realized that the prince did not actually hate Celia, but was simply very worried about her at the time. A short time later, the heir of Siphos, the princess, and the owner of the garden came to a field of pearl flowers. The main character, bending down to the plants to take a closer look, admitted with a smile that these were the most beautiful flowers she had ever seen. The gardener thanked the lady for the compliment, but she suddenly asked her to listen more carefully because she wanted to tell her something important. Sarah froze in surprise when the lady said that she was currently producing a magical cream for Siphos, and she wanted her permission to use her flowers for the cream. Margaret, as if not believing what she had heard, excitedly asked the lady if it was her flowers she wanted to use. The princess smiled tenderly and said that it was so, and she would pay her 100 gold for each piece. The gardener screamed when she heard this and admitted that she could not sell them at such a high price, since the baron was buying them for only 10 gold. Celia's joy immediately disappeared somewhere, and she disappointedly asked the girl again if this man was really buying her flowers for 10 coins. She replied that this was true, and then thought about what she had said wrong. The heroine explained that pearl flowers are a very expensive plant that grows only in the highlands, and they require a lot of attention and care. The lady angrily declared that it was very strange that the baron was buying them at such a low price. The gardener felt very awkward and replied that this could not be true. The girl says that the baron told her that due to new technologies, it has become easier to grow these flowers, so their average price is 20 gold. Celia was very surprised that such expensive flowers were priced so cheaply. She grabbed her head and said that last year they cost 80 gold and you can't buy them anywhere for less. Sarah's world collapsed under her feet. When she heard this, Milady asked the lady if it meant that the baron had been deceiving her all this time. The princess remained sadly silent and thought that the man was simply taking advantage of the fact that Margaret was still a child. Suddenly, the sorceress, squeezing the gardener's hands tightly, told her that she could become the most famous flower girl in all of Grimoire. The lady stated that she should receive a decent wage for her work so that she could maintain her parents' flower fields. But Sarah lowered her head in embarrassment and reminded the girl that all this time she had been selling pearl flowers for 10 gold, and now their price was increasing. Celia said that in that case she would write a letter to the baron because it was important to her that their deal was fair. Several hours passed, and the same entrepreneur received a letter from the main character. However, after carefully reading the text, the man became so angry that he clenched his teeth in displeasure. He tore the letter into a bunch of little pieces, outraged by the nonsense he had just read. The gentleman, in a fit of anger, threw the scraps of paper to the sides, asking himself why the hell this girl decided to interfere with him. Celia, holding a cup of tea, asked the baron with a smile why he had arranged a meeting with her and what he wanted to talk about. He sadly replied that he wanted to discuss with her the flowers that Sarah grows. The man admits that he did buy them from her at a very low price, but he had a special reason for that. The gentleman said that Margaret was very lacking in experience and knowledge, and besides, she did not take very good care of her flowers, and their quality was terrible. The main character, pretending to put her hand to her cheek, gasped in disappointment at the businessman's words. The man added in a sad voice that the thing is that even when he buys flowers from her for 10 gold pieces, he already goes into the minus. But the next moment, the Baron enthusiastically declared that it was not worth relying on a young girl to manage the fields because women were only needed for marriage. The sorceress trembled slightly when she heard these expressions, and her brow furrowed in confusion. But when the businessman asked the princess if she agreed with his opinion, she laughed sweetly and said that anything was possible. A sly smile appeared on the businessman's face because he believed that his guesses were correct. Celia was just a fool who believed everything he said. After some time, the Baron's subordinate came into his office and handed the gentleman a prepared report on sales for the last month. Thoughtfully taking the document in his hands, the man assumed that the profit in the last 30 days should also be good. He, remembering the main character, thinks that they talked about her as a great magician, but she turned out to be an ordinary fool who no longer bothers him. Turning the page and looking at the report, the businessman decided that Sarah's flowers were the easiest money to make, and he did the right thing by shutting Celia up. However, after reading the text on the paper more carefully, the Baron cried out in displeasure and asked his subordinate why sales had fallen by half. The guy says in a frightened voice that a new shop has opened in town that sells pearl flowers, and they are much fresher than the ones they sell. The businessman clenched his jaw in rage and with trembling hands brought the sheet of paper with the report closer to his eyes as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The man slammed his fist on the table and shouted that there couldn't be flowers fresher in that shop than theirs. In a fit of anger, he threw the documents with the report in different directions, asking who the owner of that shop was. The subordinate, barely dodging the papers falling from the ceiling, said that those flowers were sold by a young girl. But the Baron angrily shouted that this was some kind of nonsense, after which the servant asked for forgiveness and fell silent. The businessman stood up abruptly from his chair, deciding that he would check out what kind of store it was himself, since that girl had a secret for keeping flowers so fresh. The man, seething with rage, promised himself that he would find this scoundrel and burn her along with her flowers. Meanwhile, the bazaar in the capital of Grimoire was already bustling with life. A crowd of citizens were strolling along its streets and looking for goods. Among them moved the Baron, whose bitterness frightened those around him to the point of horror. Gritting his teeth and bulging his eyes in anger, he began to look for the very shop to which most of his customers had moved. But suddenly his gaze falls on bunches of pearl flowers, and the man realizes that he has found this store. Seeing the price of these plants, 150 gold pieces, the businessman was horrified and wondered who would buy them at that price. Noticing a certain young girl standing next to the pearl flowers, the gentleman angrily called out to her. When Milady turned around in bewilderment, the man realized that it was his friend Sarah. He was completely perplexed by what she was doing at the market. The Baron irritably asked Margaret what this all meant, and why she was selling flowers on her own if she had been working with him all this time. She sighed and replied that it was because she couldn't depend on him all her life. Suddenly, the businessman, waving his hand at Sarah, shouted menacingly that this was complete nonsense, and she was obliged to sit silently and sell her flowers only to him. But then, out of nowhere, the main character appeared, who, with the help of her magic, stopped the master's hand, which he wanted to hit the girl with. The princess, holding the Baron with magic, told him that all this time he had only been using the flower girl and had no right to raise his hand to her. The businessman, frightened, pulled back and stroked his aching hand, and with a smile told Celia that they had seen each other recently, and he had told her the reason. Suddenly, the protagonist asked with frightening calm if he meant it when he said that Sarah's flowers were of poor quality. The man's anxiety level jumped up significantly. He, drenched in sweat and looking around, asked the lady what she was talking about. Meanwhile, the sorceress asked the Baron again whether he had said that by buying flowers for 10 gold, he was already making a loss. He replied that the plants had never been as beautiful as they were now. This greatly amazed the flower girl herself. The businessman, pretending as if nothing had happened, put his hands on Margaret's shoulders and told her that he was very glad that she had become much more skilled. But the girl, looking at the bunches of pearl flowers, told the gentleman that these flowers were no different from those she sold him. Celia told the gentleman that she had taken the sales reports from the market and that it was obvious to the naked eye that he had lied about the losses. The Baron's soul sank into his heels when the main character added that he had earned about 1,000 gold in a year from his machinations. Boiling with rage, the businessman shouted at the girl that she was now a princess of another country, and information about sales in the grimoire was forbidden to her, and its disclosure was a crime. But then Sarah decided not to remain silent any longer, and confessed to the man that it was she who told Her Highness about the sales. The girl added that Celia said that she had to know the truth, and then she would have to make a decision herself. The flower girl said with determination in her eyes that she just wanted a fair deal. The protagonist immediately ordered 2 of her guards to arrest the Baron. The guards took away the swindler, who continued to loudly complain and tell the princess that he would definitely take revenge on her. The sorceress, realizing that one of her problems had been solved, sighed with relief. Sarah decided to apologize and tell the lady that she should not have negotiated for her, although she relied on her very much. The young lady waved her hand and replied sheepishly that she had no reason to blame herself. However, the girl said that this was not true because she could not be independent if she always relied on others. Milady enthusiastically confessed to Miss that this was why she had decided to learn more about trading. Looking resolutely at her clenched fist, she added that she would defend the fields dear to her with her own strength. Sarah's firmness in her intentions and self-confidence brought a pleasant smile and pride for her friend to the face of the main character. It was a dark night. A small boy in a stylish suit and with a lollipop in his hand, playfully swinging his leg from side to side, told his interlocutor that His Highness would return tomorrow. Sitting opposite the young man was Grid, who told him that there had been an explosion in the laboratory and asked the boy if Celia had been hurt. He, twirling his lollipop in his hand, first asked if he meant that great magician, and then replied that she would not suffer from such a trifle. Mr. Utila, smiling as he looked at the jar of magic cream, said that it was good because many problems could have arisen. The boy only smiled in response and took a small bite of his treat. The next day came, and the main character, together with her husband, decided to visit the grave of a loved one. Helios silently placed the bouquet on the tombstone, and the girl remained standing nearby, thoughtfully looking at the slab. Celia smiled because she had never imagined that she would come to visit her mother's grave with her husband, although in her past life she had not even returned to Grimoire. The prince, rising to his feet, decided to ask his wife what her mother was like. She replied that she always smiled and was very kind, as if she were an angel and not a human being. Hearing these words, His Highness remembered that when he first saw Celia at the wedding ceremony, he thought that she was an angel. The man smiled when he realized that it turns out his wife looked a lot like her mother. He looked at the grave with a smile and told the princess that he would like to talk to her mother. The protagonist, looking at her husband, thought about how her mother would react when she saw Helios. A couple of hours later, a carriage was prepared for the prince and princess to be sent to Cephos, and the newlyweds themselves decided to say goodbye to everyone before leaving. The Duke, holding his daughter's hands excitedly, said that he would like her to stay with them a little longer. The girl answered with a smile that she would come back, so she asked her father not to miss her so much. The man, barely holding back his tears, wanted to say something. But suddenly Russell smilingly told him that if he made Celia cry, the spell he had cast would be activated. This frightened the gentleman very much. The magician's words stunned Helios as well, but the next moment the magician, laughing, said that he was just joking. He, looking into the prince's face, said that even if such a curse existed, it would never be activated. Celia's father, patting His Highness on the shoulder, said that this was so. Meanwhile, the main character, looking at her dad, husband, and friend in bewilderment, does not understand when these three managed to get along so well. Suddenly, Russell suggested to his friends to change the subject and said that information had appeared about the arson of the laboratory. The sorceress, along with Helios and her father, were shocked when the magician added that there were several criminals. Her Highness asked the man in shock how this was even possible. Russell said that each of these criminals was forced by someone else, and before they even noticed, their bodies began to move on their own. The main character, having thought, logically assumed that someone could have forced them. The magician replied that this was so, and showing a black smoke coming from the tip of his finger, added that at the site of the arson, he had found such traces of magic. Celia was in extreme shock, then shouted that it was black magic. The wizard told his friend that she had come to the absolutely correct conclusion. Helios asked his wife what this meant, and she said that if you make a deal with the devil, you can get a huge supply of magical power. This magic is forbidden, and the mind of the user of black magic is under the control of the devil. The use of such magic has been prohibited for several years. Until this time, it was believed that there were no more practitioners of black magic, but now someone suddenly needed it. The Duke thoughtfully asked if the real culprit's goal was so important to him that he was ready to break the ban. Russell added that the criminals also had information that only people from Sifos could know. Helios asked excitedly if this meant that the real culprit was hiding in Sifos. The magician replied that this was so he asked his friends to be extremely careful. The protagonist fell silent, beginning to think about who the real initiator of the fire was and what its purpose was. At this time, the father of the main character, looking seriously at Helios, asked him to protect his daughter at all costs, which the prince promised him. Having said goodbye to everyone, the carriage of the main character and Helios left back to Sifos. The girl and her husband rode in the carriage in silence, wondering why nothing like this had happened in her past life. The lady wonders if it is because she took a different path and because she changed everything. Beads of sweat ran down the lady's face as she assumed that it was because of her that such danger had arisen. Helios, noticing Celia's anxiety, gently touched her palm with his fingers and quietly called out. The man looked excitedly into his wife's eyes and asked if everything was okay with her. The sorceress was about to answer, but suddenly the carriage shuddered in some way, which greatly frightened the young couple. The prince, seeing that the girl had lost her balance, rushed to her aid. Celia closed her eyes and felt that the carriage was now moving smoothly and calmly. She did not understand what had just happened, but as soon as the princess opened her eyes, she saw Helios in front of her, hanging over her and holding her by the waist with one hand. His Highness and the main character were so confused by this unusual situation that they could do nothing but look at each other in bewilderment and blush. But then the carriage doors are opened by an alarmed Mary, who informs the gentleman that an earthquake has occurred. The girl wanted to ask the newlyweds if they were hurt, but seeing how close the two were to each other, she immediately fell silent. The maid looked away in embarrassment and apologized, but Celia, rushing towards her, declared that she had simply misunderstood everything. The young heir was left to watch as his wife calmed down her subordinate, who thought she had interrupted them, ruining all the romance. The prince and princess went outside, where the knights explained to them that several carriages had been damaged, and the bridge they were supposed to cross had collapsed. Celia is stunned by this, but she realizes that all the parts of the carriages that are broken can be fixed. However, even if they do this, they will not be able to go further, as there is a big problem with the bridge. One of the guards approached His Highness and suggested that they return back to the Grimoire. But Helios resolutely replied that they would not do so because new tremors might occur on the way, so it would be better for them to set up camp in this place. With the help of her magic, the main character instantly erected a spacious and reliable tent nearby. The two knights who were watching this were very apologetic and said that no matter what they had seen, magic was a wonderful thing and they would like to possess it too. Looking at the boys, the sorceress thought that thanks to their visit to the Grimoire, the knights began to treat witchcraft more softly. The girl was very pleased to realize this fact, so she smiled silently. But suddenly the lady's bright thoughts were interrupted by her inner voice, which asked if she was really okay with this. The imaginary person asked Celia if she thought there was danger hidden behind the knight's ordinary interest. A look of genuine horror appeared on the sorceress's face when the voice said that the black magician could be somewhere nearby and all the people around her would die. The lady was pulled out of her thoughts by her husband, who asked the guards why they were standing around doing nothing. They sheepishly apologized and said that they were already getting down to work. Helios seemed somehow bewitching to the princess. His disheveled black hair and sweat running down his skin made the man's appearance so attractive. Noticing his wife's intent gaze, the gentleman asked if everything was okay with her, since she looked tired, to which she, embarrassedly turning away and frowning, said that everything was fine. The lady admits that she thought about looking for materials to repair the carriages. The prince did not like this idea at first, and he anxiously asked his wife not to do this and just stay here. But the next moment, he fell silent because he realized that he couldn't answer like that. Having calmed down, His Highness asked the sorceress with a smile if she could help him, if she wanted it so much. The heroine, thinking that she had never imagined that her husband would ever ask her for help, smiled happily and agreed. The couple headed towards the forest, and Mary, who was busy preparing food, wanted to see what was going on there. The maid smiled because she finally saw how the two got along. As Celia walks and looks around, she thinks that the bridge is destroyed, but there is not a single fallen tree nearby, and this is too suspicious. The girl suggests that someone could have deliberately caused the earthquake using black magic. Suddenly, the heroine's inner voice began to carry paranoia again. It tells the lady that if she had not decided to change her life, then now everyone would not be in danger because of forbidden magic. Helios, noticing that his wife was thinking about something, asked if she was thinking about setting the laboratory on fire. He explained to the girl that if she regretted returning to Grimoire, then she was very much mistaken, and together they would find a way to protect their future. The main character nervously clutched the fabric of her dress, thinking that you can't move forward if you regret your past. The lady smiled tenderly and agreed with her husband, realizing how reliable he had been all this time. The prince, looking at his wife, also smiled and thought that her smile was still incredibly beautiful. The man was about to suggest that the lady return to the camp, but suddenly a cry for help was heard, to which the young couple immediately responded. The heir quickly realized where the voice came from, and together with the sorceress, he ran to the destroyed bridge on which the man was hanging. Seeing the unfortunate man dangling on the edge of the cliff, the protagonist and Helios gasped in shock. It turns out that there is a little boy on the edge of the abyss who, bursting into tears, desperately asks for help. Helios shouted to the child that he should not worry, and that he was already on his way to help him. The prince had already started running to help the baby, but at one point he froze because he was wondering whether he would make it in time at all. Suddenly, Celia asked her husband to stop and, armed with her magic, said that she would now save the boy herself. The boy was stunned with shock when he realized that his body was floating through the air. His Highness, also stunned, asked the girl if the boy had really flown, and she answered with a smile that he had, and with the help of her flight magic, she would transport the unfortunate boy to a safe place. Bringing the child closer to her, the sorceress weakened her magic, causing the baby to fall, but the lady caught him right in her arms. Helios asked Celia if he was injured, to which the princess said no, and that he only had scratches. The heroine sat the boy on the ground to heal his bruises with the help of magic. The boy, mesmerized by the way his wounds were healing, told his savior that nothing hurt anymore. The princess smiled and said that it was so and that he was now doing well. The protagonist decided to introduce herself to the child and said that her name was Celia, and the man next to her was her husband named Helios. The prince was suddenly dumbfounded because he was taken aback by the fact that the main character called him her husband. The lady asked the boy his name, and he replied in a trembling voice that his name was Leto Wallace. Suddenly tears appeared in the young man's eyes, and he sheepishly thanked Her Highness for saving him, because at that moment he no longer knew what to do. The boy threw himself into Celia's arms, saying that she was his savior and sister, which greatly puzzled the lady. Helios was very upset by this, and reminded the child that she was the princess of Sifos, but the sorceress said that everything was fine. The man did not object any further, but the displeasure on his face was still noticeable. But suddenly the gentleman notices the boy's strange look at him as he smiles sarcastically. This greatly surprised and angered the man, but he did not speak about it out loud, but simply remained silent. The couple and their child arrived at their camp, where everyone was busy with important matters, and Celia was entertaining the victim with conversation. The girl handed her little friend a lollipop, which made him very happy, and exclaimed that he really loved sweets. He thanked the princess with a smile, then said that no matter how much he trained, he still couldn't use magic. The heroine encouraged him, saying that everything was fine, and if he trained, then someday everything would work out. The boy's eyes sparkled, and he called Celia his sister and thanked her. Leto asked the lady to show him more magic, and Helios, like the other knights, was moving firewood, occasionally glancing at his wife and the young man. The protagonist fulfilled the baby's wish and began to show different animals in the air with the help of her charms. The prince, looking at them, thinks that his beloved will surely get tired if she uses her magic for so long. Here, His Highness, squatting down next to the boy, asked him if he wanted to play with him. Leto was surprised at first, but then said that his sister was enough for him, after which he grabbed Celia's sleeve and stuck his tongue out at the man. The heir of Siphos was quite taken aback by this, but quickly put the child on his back and walked towards the forest, asking him not to be so harmful. The disgruntled youth tried to hint to the gentleman that he did not like it, but he continued walking, saying that he had found a place nearby with a beautiful view. Celia smiled as she looked at her husband and thought that if he wanted to play with the boy so much, he would become a great father in the future. But suddenly, a blush flared up in her cheeks because she caught herself thinking that she was seriously thinking about such things. The sun quickly set behind the horizon, and the sorceress, along with Helios and the maid, spent time by the fire entertaining the boy. Leto, holding a fragrant shashlik in his hands, sadly says that his dad is probably very worried about him. Celia stroked the baby's head and said that he would definitely come home tomorrow. Helios, watching the boy from the side, thinks that at first glance he seems like a very good boy. Suddenly, barbecue sauce dripped onto Leto's clothes, and Celia, seeing this, screamed in surprise. The girl headed towards the tent with a smile, saying that she would bring the child a change of clothes. Then the prince remembered that he had a handkerchief hidden in his pocket, which he handed to the poor fellow. But the young master suddenly threw the handkerchief into the air with his unclean magic, which greatly stunned His Highness. Having pulled off this maneuver, the rag landed right in his palm, and the little sorcerer himself smiled slyly, humming a song. Leto began to wipe the sauce off his clothes, and Helios was stunned because the boy said he couldn't use magic. After this, the main character returned to the guys with new clothes, and the prince immediately wanted to tell her about what had just happened. But the man didn't succeed because the boy interrupted him joyfully, exclaiming that he had been given a handkerchief. The princess was surprised by this, and she thanked Helios, but he himself, looking at Leto with puzzlement, wondered what kind of strange feeling had appeared in him. Night fell, and the protagonist and her husband moved into the tent where they were already preparing for bed. Celia closed her eyes because her heart was beating suspiciously fast when she realized that she would be alone with her husband. The lady's memory became clearer as she watched Helios stand so close to her that she could feel his breath on her lips. A scarlet blush appeared on the sorceress's face because she realized that as soon as they arrived together at Grimoire, everything seemed to have turned upside down. At this time, His Highness is diligently discussing why the boy lied about not being able to use magic. The man decided to turn to his wife and said that he wanted to talk to her about Leto. Celia turned sharply towards him, but the blush on her cheeks still adorned her face. Helios, seeing this, put his palm to the girl's forehead and excitedly asked if she had a fever. Thinking that it was all about the boy, the prince explained to his beloved that it was of course normal that she was worried about his health, but there was no need to overexert herself with magic. But the princess, shyly lowering her gaze, said that this was not the matter at all. His Highness was taken aback and asked what it was then, but the heroine did not answer him. The lady blushed even more, lowering her innocent gaze to the floor. Helios was surprised by this because it dawned on him that the reason for the lady's confusion lay in himself. The prince gently touched his wife's hair with his finger, tenderly tucking one strand behind her back. The girl looked at him, and the gentleman, bending down to the lady, brought his palm closer to her face. Suddenly, Leto appears at the entrance to the tent, followed by a frightened maid. The newlyweds were so frightened by his appearance that they shuddered. Celia smiled and sweated with shame, and the boy, boldly walking towards her, asked if they could sleep together tonight. Mary, having bowed to the lady several times, apologized and said that she could not stop the boy in any way, but the sorceress declared that everything was fine. The princess allowed the child to sleep with her, which he was initially happy about, but then looked with some disdain at the stunned Helios. A moment later, the boy's duplicity seemed to evaporate, and he, smiling happily, thanked the princess. Leto sat down next to the heroine on the sofa, and Celia, looking at him, thought that maybe it was for the best that he came to them. But suddenly, the lady's face flushed again when she remembered what had happened between her and Helios a moment ago, and what would have happened next if the child had not burst into their tent. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed something strange about the young man, causing her to call out to him in bewilderment. The girl was puzzled by the mysterious dark symbol on the boy's back. The lady excitedly asked the young gentleman why there was a mark of black magic on his skin. Helios, hearing the words about black magic, trembled warily and began to sweat. The boy abruptly covered his back with his clothes as if he didn't want them to see it. But the heroine, placing her hand on the young man's shoulder, said that he need not worry and that they would listen to him. Leto admitted that because he could not use his magic, his father taught him black magic. The protagonist is very shocked by this because she cannot believe that the boy is only 10 years old and his dad has already taught him forbidden spells. The boy, smiling at his hands, says that since then, he can use a little magic. However, he looked pitifully at his sister and admitted that when he uses black magic, he becomes scared because he hears a terrifying voice. Celia cheerfully told the boy that he was a good boy for telling them about it because his father probably told him not to tell his secret to anyone. The baby climbed up to the girl to hug her, calling her sister, and she hugged him back. His Majesty also smiled and joined his wife, embracing her and Leto, but suddenly, the little sorcerer, while no one was looking, put a suspiciously sly grin on his face. The next day has arrived. The main character watches as the carriage is being repaired with the help of magic. One of the subordinates decided to tell the lady that there had been no earthquakes in the country, and it seemed that the shaking was only in this area. Celia, reflecting that it was probably no ordinary earthquake, said that she had thought so. Looking at the boxes that had arrived with the help, the girl thanked the servants for bringing them the materials so they could move on. The sorceress's face was dazzled by a bright smile, and she told the men that all that remained was to repair the bridge. The subordinates blushed because they were pleased to realize that they could be useful to the princess. Suddenly, Celia remembered something and, handing the servants an envelope with a letter, asked them to give it to Russell. The protagonist believes that it is better for her to tell her best friend about Leto's father, so she chooses to do it in the form of a telegram. The servants, having taken the letter, promised the lady that they would definitely fulfill her request. Meanwhile, Helios, squatting down in front of the boy, advised him to be careful on the way home. He smiled happily and told the prince that he had nothing to worry about. His Majesty, looking closely at the young master's face, wonders if he really wanted to hide his black magic. But the man doesn't understand why he then used magic in front of his eyes to take the handkerchief while smiling strangely. The young heir told Leto that black magic was a dangerous thing, but if he needed help, he could always turn to him. The boy, affectionately calling the man his brother, thanked him for this. But suddenly, Leto, leaning closer to the prince's ear, mockingly whispered to him that he only needed his sister. Before Helios could do anything, the voice of a servant was heard nearby, calling the boy into the carriage because it was time for him to go home. The boy ran to the carriage, which greatly angered the already confused gentleman. A moment later, the boy was already setting off and Celia was seeing him off. The young wizard's carriage flew across the sky, and he looked out of the window and joyfully waved goodbye to the heroine. Helios looked at the boy in bewilderment, and the main character waved back and wished him luck. The prince, without saying a word, angrily clenched his fist because he had not managed to do anything. Meanwhile, Leto is riding in a carriage with two subordinates who do not even dare to speak to him, maintaining perfect silence. Suddenly, the young man, enjoying his favorite lollipop and looking at the letter addressed to Russell, says that Celia is very kind. He found the lines from her letter funny, where she asks him to help her. After completely incinerating the letter with magic, the boy says that she didn't understand one thing: it is he who must free her. Looking at the scenery from the carriage window, the protagonist thinks that Leto's father may be the organizer of the explosion, although it is too early to draw conclusions. The girl understands that there is nothing good in this because black magic has no place in this world. The lady decides that she must first find an informant in Cyphus. The sorceress remembered that her husband wanted to tell her something about Leto, so she asked him about it. But Helios suddenly told his wife in an irritated tone that she should not get involved in this matter anymore. The princess was stunned by her husband's sudden aggression and stared at him in surprise. It was approaching evening, and the butler of the imperial palace of Cephos was already standing at the front entrance awaiting the arrival of the newlyweds' carriage. The man is eager to see the couple as he heard that their relationship in the Grimoire has improved. The servant hopes to see the prince smile for the first time in 20 years. At last, the royal carriage drew up, and Celia's foot immediately appeared from its doors. The princess and the prince got out of the transport, but to the butler's great surprise, their attitude towards each other was cold, and both of their faces were more dissatisfied than ever. The servant was very surprised and upset by this, but as expected, he modestly greeted the gentleman. The man glanced at Mary's maid and asked her what had happened, but she only shook her head in agitation. The heroine remembers that 3 hours ago her husband asked her not to get involved with Leto anymore and not to get involved in black magic anymore because he could handle it himself. She asked him why, and the young man replied that there was something wrong with him because the boy said that he only needed a sister. The girl asked if the boy meant that he wanted to play only with her. His Majesty replied that in that case he doubted that Leto would want to express it in such words. The sorceress thought for a moment and said that perhaps a demon could already be controlling him, and she and her husband needed to quickly reveal the truth. But Helios, suddenly frowning sternly, told his wife that she did not need to do anything. Celia countered that she was in fact the crown princess of Sifos and a mage of Grimoire, and she also had a duty to protect her country. The prince nervously replied that what was much more important was that she was his wife, and he, as her husband, had to protect her. The main character clenched her fist in excitement and wondered if this meant that while she was married to Helios, she had no freedom of choice. At this time, His Highness reflects on the fact that there is no evidence that Leto is dangerous, but his intuition tells him that he cannot be messed with. The man is very worried because he wants to protect Celia from danger, but he does not understand how to express his thoughts so that she understands him. Finally, the heir simply told the girl that he could not allow her to investigate this matter of black magic. The sorceress asked if this was an order, and he calmly and briefly said that it was. The protagonist, looking into her husband's eyes, frowned in disappointment and pursed her lips. After some time, the main character was walking along the corridors of Sifos's palace talking about her problems. The girl thinks that she knows that Helios is actually a very kind person, but the lady doesn't like the fact that he is always trying to control everything and will still try to keep her locked up. Celia decided that she would earn money and divorce the prince, and she could investigate the black magic case while she was doing business. Suddenly, the sorceress meets an acquaintance of hers, Grid, who greets his friend kindly. The man told my lady that he knew that her creams were selling well. She, thinking that to some extent he was the only one she could rely on, said that this was so and not without his help. Grid replied that it was a great honor for him and that she could turn to him for help at any time. But these words angered the girl, and she mentally replied that he would not wait for this. Suddenly, the protagonist began to think that her friend might know something about black magic. The lady immediately shook her head because she decided that it was better not to ask him about it, since she did not want to divulge unnecessary information. Here, Grid told his friend that he heard that they helped the child when they returned to them. The man asked if there were any problems. Celia said with a smile that she had returned safely from the grimoire without any incidents. The heroine thought that if he found out about the child with the mark of black magic, he would not leave her alone. Then the prince asked how his brother Helios had behaved with her, and the sorceress immediately frowned because they had recently had a squabble. The princess did not answer the gentleman's question, but asked for forgiveness, and said that she had urgent business, so she needed to go quickly. Grid, watching the lady walk away, thought that she had already met with Leto, and he must have prevented Celia and Helios from getting along. The sorceress, having come to a meeting with her business colleague George, hears rave reviews from her customer. The gentleman, with a huge smile, informs the princess that all the batches of creams were sold out in the blink of an eye. At first, the heroine did not show any particular expression, but only modestly said that she was glad to hear it. But in her heart, she is happy that she earned 2,000 solid gold, and she is closer to her goal. The girl thinks that it is better to constantly replenish the goods because there are always girls who want to buy it. The protagonist is also aware that many who fear being reprimanded for using magical products order the cream in secret. Feeling very proud of herself, the lady lifted the tip of her nose because she had prepared more positions than necessary. But the businesswoman knows there is one catch. George starts talking to Celia about someone who would like to meet her. She said that she guessed it, and asked if this man was the head of the sewing guild, Count Grace, to which the man said yes. The sewing guild makes corsets, but more and more girls are turning away from them, thanks to Celia's cream, and Grace wants to talk about it. The sorceress remembers that she wanted to meet the Count herself, but he beat her to it. The lady knows that if she does business with him, she will get more clients. Her Majesty believes that this may also be useful to her investigation. Celia tells the customer that they should meet as soon as possible, so she herself will visit the guild soon. But the man's unexpected statement left the girl stunned. He said that apparently the leader had already arrived at this castle. Meanwhile, Grace, a red-haired man in a burgundy coat and hat, standing at the foot of the palace, says that he can't wait to see Her Highness. The head of the sewing guild appeared in the room, elegantly removing his hat to the lady and apologizing for his sudden visit. She, smilingly extending her hand to the gentleman for a handshake, said that he knew how to surprise. The men shook hands, and the Count confessed to Celia that he should thank her, for he had long desired to meet her in person. The main character almost lost her head from such kindness on the part of the charming man, although everyone like her was stunned by his visit. A few minutes earlier, Grace following the maid, Mary says that he spent an entire hour near the palace without finding the right passage, because it is difficult for him to orient himself in space. The subordinate was very surprised by this and said that she sympathized with him very much because the territory of the palace was huge and it was not surprising that he got lost. Mary, remembering the moment when she first saw the Count lost in the garden, understands why he stood there with such a displeased face. Having reached Celia's office, the maid asks the master to pass, while the other maids behind her cannot stop admiring him. The head of the guild, smiling irresistibly at the girl, thanked her for helping him in such a difficult hour for him. Meanwhile, the princess and her colleague heard the delighted squeals of the girls outside the door in the office. Soon, the director of the sewing company joined the conversation of the businessmen. Her Highness asked if he had come to discuss her cream. The man said that it was, and that this cream was very popular among ladies because their waist could become thinner without any pain in the body. But Grace added that his mother and sister literally fell in love with this magical remedy, and in their joy, they even threw away their corsets. The sorceress felt tension when she heard these words, but she did not interrupt the mister. The head of the guild says that his company is engaged in sewing corsets, and many craftsmen earn their living in this business. The man emphasizes that his duty as a director is to provide people with work, and he cannot ignore what is currently happening in the market. The main character felt sad at the thought that many people were losing their jobs because of her cream, but suddenly she declares that she can solve this problem, after which she gestures for the maid to come over. The men were presented with several options of beautifully embroidered women's underwear. Celia asked Grace if he would like to join forces to popularize these products. The surprised chief asked if it was made of magic threads. The lady said yes, and that the corset not only tightened the ladies' waists but also supported the bust. The man decides to try one of the items by touch, and the witch assures that they can improve the lingerie since corsets are going out of fashion. Grace tells the lady that he understood her idea, but asked if she was sure that this product would gain the same popularity as the cream. She replied that she couldn't know for sure, but with a coquettish wink, she said that she was sure that the ladies would enjoy wearing beautiful underwear. But suddenly, Celia thought that wearing it for Helios was a waste of time because he kept saying that he didn't want to touch her. The girl decided that she couldn't be distracted and declared that thanks to the magic threads, the underwear she made could both reduce and increase the bust. At this point, George and the chief looked at the princess in surprise and asked what she meant. The lady explained that if a girl wears underwear that is a smaller size, her breasts will become smaller, and if she wears a larger size, they will become larger. The client told Celia that this was somehow illogical since he had never heard of women wanting to reduce their breast size. The gentleman decided to ask the director of the sewing company his opinion, but he suddenly began to sweat and tremble. The head was embarrassed to answer, but Her Highness said that the product would be popular because girls with large busts were probably tired of the lustful glances of passers-by, and the product would help them with this. The princess added that the product will also be in demand among women who are subject to frequent physical labor because they also feel uncomfortable. George admitted that the idea sounded good, and the protagonist smiled sweetly. Turning to Grace, the sorceress said that the masters of sewing who work in his guild would help bring this idea to life. Celia asked the gentleman if he would like to start a business together with her, but suddenly, the man, after a few moments of silence, asked George if he would mind leaving the room for a few minutes. The customer asked again in surprise, and the man said that he wanted to talk to the princess one-on-one. Left alone with the lady, Grace confidently stood up from the sofa and headed towards Celia, saying that she had presented him with a great idea for a business. However, handing the girl one of the underwear, the man with a frightening smile says that he would like to see the effect of this underwear in action. The main character's stunned gaze froze on the man, and she quietly asked him again. Suddenly, the Count began to unbutton his shirt, revealing a bandage wrapped around his chest, and the heroine, looking away in embarrassment, asked what he was doing. But the man, having taken off what turned out to be his wig, told the girl that he understood how shocked she was by his antics, and he asked for forgiveness for it. Taking off her shirt and showing off her feminine curves along with her long, silky hair, the leader admitted that she had been lying about her gender the whole time. Celia, looking at the guild director in shock, screamed because it was actually a girl. Grace, putting on a larger bra, wonders if her breasts will really get bigger if she wears lingerie with magic threads. The lady was absolutely delighted when her curves actually increased in size. The sorceress said that they have a range of sizes with a much larger chest circumference, but the lady wanted to test underwear in a smaller size. The lady gasped in delight as her breasts shrank with the smaller bra. The head of the guild looked at the product with admiration, and Celia added that when wearing such underwear, the chest will not be compressed and will not hurt like from bandages. After returning the underwear to its owner, the director said that it was incredibly cool and that she would like to buy one for her personal use. The protagonist smiled and thought that everything had turned out well and that Grace apparently liked her idea. The Countess got dressed, and Celia asked if she could call her Avery, to which she agreed. The witch then asked why she was pretending to be a man, but the princess became worried when the lady said that in this world a woman would never be taken seriously. The lady admits that she dreamed of her own sewing guild since childhood. However, when she grew up and tried to develop her business, everyone turned away from her because no one wanted to work for a woman. But the Countess says that once she pretended to be a man, everyone immediately listened to her proposals, a fact Avery finds hilariously ironic. The girl with a forced smile said that the business world was cruel to women. She apologized to Celia for having to listen to her sad story. The heroine, looking down, said that this applies not only to the business world because some are convinced that a woman exists to obey. While Her Highness is conducting business discussions, Helios is busy reading the newspaper in his office. Suddenly, a speck of dust flew into the gentleman's nose, causing him to sneeze, breaking the deathly silence in the room and the serious atmosphere. It turns out that the prince is reading a news article that talks about his wife and the success of her cream. Realizing how much success his beloved had achieved in her business, the man smiled warmly. Meanwhile, the girls continue their discussion. The Countess asks Celia if she is familiar with her situation, and she says yes, and she is already tired of it. Avery said she wishes women had it easier and could pursue their dreams in whatever way they wanted, rather than having to do what she did. The heroine recalls that when she started her business, she noticed one strange thing. Women have to put up with a lot of things day after day. The lady understands that they can also be exploited by men, as happened to Sarah. These thoughts prompted the sorceress to say the following. She joyfully offers the Countess to make her dream come true. The director of the sewing company asked the girl in surprise what she meant. She asked her friend with a sly smile if she thought the underwear with magic threads would sell well, hinting at huge profits. Avery loved the idea and said with a wicked smile that she was already looking forward to the joyful screams of her masters. The protagonist clenched her fist enthusiastically and declared that together they would make a lot of money. The guild leader happily added that they would make the men who laughed at them swallow their dust. Avery decided that their conversation was over, so she began to get ready, promising Celia to contact her as soon as the first prototype was ready. She, grabbing her friend by the hand to lead her to the carriage, said that she would eagerly await news from her. Suddenly, as soon as the heroine left the room with the Countess, she came across her husband accompanied by a concubine. The sorceress was slightly surprised by this, but did not notice that she herself was accompanied by Avery, who had changed back into a man. Finding his wife with another man, Helios noticed that he again felt that strange feeling as when he found Celia with Russell. He was not pleased, but he could no longer ignore her desires. The protagonist, smiling happily, greeted the prince, and then his concubine. The man greeted her back, and Thelma frowned in disgust and turned away. Suddenly, the princess, walking past her husband and his companion and apologizing for her rudeness, said that she and the count were in a hurry. But before the girl had time to walk even a couple of steps, Helios stopped her, grabbing her by the wrist. Celia calmly turned around and asked the gentleman what had happened. The prince, letting go of the girl's hand, asked what the matter was about which she had met with Count Grace. At that moment, Avery remembered hearing that Celia was in a tense relationship with her husband, but he was still curious. However, looking at the princess, the Countess understands that her expression shows that she does not want to enlighten him in detail. Also noticing the displeased expression on Thelma's face, Grace guessed that she found Celia annoying. Unexpectedly, the heroine, tenderly leaning on the Count's shoulder, said that he had become a precious partner for her, hinting at a business relationship. Helios was confused by his wife's expression, and in shock, he asked her again. And Avery just guessed what kind of reaction the princess wanted to get from her. The girl smiled sweetly and admitted that Mistress Celia's magic was simply magnificent, and they enjoyed its magnificence only together. Thelma bowed her head in disgust and began to grumble in displeasure when she heard the word magic. The Count added meanwhile that he simply could not help but admire such enchanting beauty. The main character froze in surprise. She was struck by the fact that Avery understood what exactly she wanted to achieve, namely, the glorification of magic. The guild director, looking at her friend with a bright smile, winked coquettishly. The sorceress suddenly thought that having a friend like her was just a dream. Afterwards, the girl returned to the conversation with her husband and concubine, and asking for forgiveness, said that she did not want to interfere with their meeting. The confused prince asked his wife what date they were talking about, and Thelma, remaining silent, pressed herself closer to the gentleman's hand. The man stated that everything was not as she thought, but the concubine did not even think of letting His Highness go. Helios, noticing that the girl was worried about something, asked her if everything was okay. Thelma furiously asked Celia if she was going to do anything with magic again. The princess was so surprised that she didn't have time to answer, as the concubine grabbed the prince by the hand and led him along, convincing him that his body would be destroyed by magic. Shocked by what was happening, the young heir asked the lady what she was doing. The main character at this time told Avery that it was time for them to go, too quietly laughing into her palm. The Countess agreed with her, and Helios turned around. Suddenly, the protagonist felt her husband gently throwing his jacket over her shoulders. The man apologized to his beloved for making her hear this about her magic. Avery was very surprised by such a display of concern from the prince, and Celia modestly replied that he did not need to apologize. Helios then turned to the Count and asked his forgiveness for keeping him late, and as an apology, he invited him to dinner next time. Grace smiled back at His Highness and said he would be honored. After this, the prince walked along with Thelma, and the sorceress turned around and looked after him for a long time. Noticing how Celia was watching her husband intently, the Countess asked what was wrong with her. Celia suddenly trembled and replied that everything was fine. Holding the man's jacket with her hand, the witch suggested that they quickly go to the carriage because they were in a hurry. The heroine walked forward as if nothing had happened, but Avery noticed one cute detail. The girl's ears turned red with embarrassment. The Countess was very delighted by this and thought what a lovely lady she was. Evening came, and Thelma led His Highness into an exquisite garden with a fountain. Helios, stopping next to the girl, asked what she wanted to talk to him about. Suddenly, the concubine, touching her stomach with her hand, said that this conversation concerned their heir. The girl told the prince that while he was away, the empress had called her to her. The queen sternly asked Thelma when she would be able to see her grandson. The concubine told the prince that since they were not going to share a bed with each other, there could be no talk of an heir, but with each passing day, it became more and more difficult to hide this fact. Helios remembered that he had long wanted to tell her something about this and suggested that she break their concubine contract. The lady waved her hand and said she was fine with it, but on one condition. The man asked what that condition was. Thelma maliciously asked him to forbid Celia from running her magic items business in exchange for terminating the contract, but the prince calmly said that he refused to do this, to which the girl stated that in that case there could be no talk of terminating the contract. 6 months ago, Helios and the concubine were talking over a cup of tea, and the lady asked the prince about when the empress would calm down about the heirs. Madame asked if he had inquired about this with the crown princess, and he replied that he had not. The young man admitted that he thinks that she doesn't even think about having an intimate relationship with him, so he doesn't even want to discuss it with her. Thelma asked the man in disappointment if maybe he should talk to her about this topic. But the girl did not say anything more because she thought that this would only benefit her, and while she was here, she would not allow Celia to do whatever she wanted. Time has returned to the present where the concubine furiously tells Helios that if she leaves this place, the entire kingdom will be engulfed in vile magic. But His Highness declared that his wife would never allow such a thing. The girl trembled at such words of the prince. The man admits that he realized this when he arrived with her in Grimoire. Celia always puts other people's interests above her own. And even when she first arrived in Sifos, she thought of others first, for example, helping wounded soldiers. But Helios understands that he limited her in everything while she was in the country of her enemy, and while her heart was oppressed by loneliness. The heir clenched his fist because he realized that his wife was caring about his state, although she should despise everything connected with it. The young man confidently told Thelma that Celia deserved more respect as a princess, and with her people would stop perceiving magic as something terrible. But the concubine suddenly asked her master if he was making fun of her. The prince told the girl that he understood that she was afraid of magic, but his wife's magic was different. Looking at his clenched fist, the man added that thanks to this magic, many soldiers from Sifos were saved, and if it were not for it, he would have died. But the girl was not convinced, and she sternly warned that if he did not close her business, she would do it herself. Helios, deciding that from now on he would protect all of Celia's interests, told Thelma that he would not let her stand in her way. Evening came, and the young princess was getting ready for bed, but before that she decided to have some tea that the butler had prepared for her. The lady was looking at the jacket that her husband had lent her, but the servant said that she could return it, to which the lady said that everything was fine. Having looked at her husband's clothes more closely, the girl thought about the fact that she still wanted to talk to Helios. Celia believes that if he is afraid that she will be outraged by his desire to have an heir with Thelma, then he should not worry. But the princess understands that if they are still threatened with divorce, then it is worth discussing black magic with him in more detail. The sorceress, gently stroking Helios's jacket, thought that she also wanted to express words of gratitude to him. But suddenly, the heroine noticed the blue flowers in a vase that were standing on the table not far from her. She remembered that this was a bouquet of elderberries that she had given her husband a few days ago. Here the butler told the lady that ever since His Highness returned from the Grimoire, he had been looking for a way to prolong the life of these flowers. Celia was so surprised by this that she asked if it was true, but the subordinate smiled and said that he had probably said too much and asked the lady to keep what he had told her a secret. The girl fell silent in amazement, and the man served the girl hot tea as if nothing had happened. Looking at the bouquet of elderberries, the protagonist thought that it was a simple gesture, but Helios so diligently wants to preserve them. The sorceress realized that she knew too little about her husband, so she decided to fix it today, but suddenly she heard a sound from behind. Turning around, the lady was stunned by what she saw. The prince entered the room with his bare, pumped-up torso. The gentleman called out to his wife in surprise. The stunned and embarrassed main character immediately walked towards the man to return his jacket to him. Having returned the prince's thing, she immediately turned around and said that she would probably go to her room. But suddenly, something unexpected happens. The girl accidentally stepped on the fabric of her dress, which is why she was ready to fly to the floor. However, the unfortunate girl is caught in time by Helios, who smiling asks the girl to be careful and thanks God that she was not hurt. The protagonist blushed embarrassedly and said that she was fine. The young man smilingly thanked his wife for returning the jacket to him personally. She, lowering her head and accidentally stuttering, once replied that it was nonsense. Then His Highness asked the princess if she was free because he wanted to talk to her face to face. The lady agreed, and after a while she was already sitting on the sofa sipping wine, waiting to start a conversation with her husband. However, after tasting the alcohol, the sorceress was suddenly surprised because the taste seemed familiar to her. She asked Helios about it. The prince's answer surprised the girl. He said that he had seen her and her father enjoying this wine while in Grimoire, so he decided to buy it before leaving. Celia, feeling strange after the man's words and blushing, thanked the gentleman, but the next moment the princess, confidently placing the glass on the table, thought that she needed to pull herself together and discuss black magic with her husband. Helios was the first to start the conversation. He confessed to his wife that he had imposed his feelings on her and forced her to obey his word as if it were an order, but now he understands that he shouldn't have done that. But the gentleman added that he did this because he did not want to put his wife's life at risk. The prince told his beloved that he wanted her to understand him. Her Highness was surprised by her husband's confession, and she stared at him in surprise. The girl suddenly decided to admit that his orders irritated her quite a bit. These words wounded the young man to the very heart. The sorceress added that she understands what prompted these actions, but believes that it was irresponsible to put people at risk for the sake of her safety. Unexpectedly, Helios smiled and told his wife that he expected her to say that. The young lady was stunned by the man's words and asked what he meant. The prince tells the lady that he would like to offer to deal with black magic together as a couple because this way he can be there and protect her at any time. The main character was so surprised by her husband's words that a scarlet blush appeared on her face. The girl says that she would not like to cause unnecessary trouble. The young man, dumbfounded, asked the princess what she was even talking about. Her Highness, clasping her hands in excitement, asked Helios if he had thought about Thelma since he could have spent time with her first, rather than his wife. The bewildered prince told his lady that he did not understand what she was talking about. Suddenly, the protagonist stated that she knew that he and his concubine would have an heir and she did not intend to interfere with this. The girl asked her husband not to worry about her explaining that she was not as weak as she seemed at first glance, and if necessary, she could stand up for herself. But then His Highness, stunned, asked the sorceress, who said that he and Thelma would have an heir. Before telling his wife something important, the prince boldly took a couple of sips of wine. The gentleman then confessed to the lady that on their wedding night he thought that if he defiled the angel in front of him, she would never be the same again. Celia was so embarrassed that her cheeks instantly turned red and the girl herself looked away. Helios confessed to his wife that the empress was very persistent in her desires, and therefore he could think of nothing else but to ask Thelma for advice. The heroine, menacingly slamming her glass on the table, thought that is, he did not want to burden her with conceiving a child, so he turned to the concubine. The witch furiously asked her husband if he understood how selfish his actions were, and whether he even thought about Thelma's feelings since her beloved approached her about such a matter. The confused man tried to tell the girl that she had misunderstood. However desperate, Celia added that he didn't even think to talk to her about her feelings. Tears appeared in the princess's eyes, and His Highness sat down closer to her and asked for forgiveness, wanting to calm the lady. The gentleman wanted to gently stroke a strand of his wife's hair and say that she was absolutely right, but the lady pulled his hand away from her. The lady asked the prince angrily if he thought he could appease her now. The princess reminded her husband that he had refused to share her bed on their wedding night and had said nothing about it. The lady also reminded that he took a concubine for himself without discussing it with her in any way and ultimately left her completely alone. Celia, throwing her fists at the gentleman, angrily asked if he thought his pathetic sorry would be enough for everything he had done. Continuing to childishly beat up the prince, she added that she even thought about creating a line of underwear, and because of him, her confidence in her beauty fell. Helios, looking at his wife, said that he now understood why she behaved this way, and the man also realized that Celia had not been against it all this time. The young lady then asked her husband if he knew what had happened to her beautiful underwear, but before revealing the secret, the girl boldly drained her glass of wine. Rising from the sofa and pointing a finger at the stunned heir, she furiously admitted that she had burned him to hell. The lady maliciously accused her husband of not understanding a damn thing about a woman's heart. The young man, thinking that he really knew nothing about Celia, gently touched the tip of her finger, causing the lady's hand to tremble slightly. The man told the girl with a smile that from now on he wanted to know everything about her. The sorceress, having calmed down and sat back down on the sofa, asked if he would leave her if she told him. Helios, stroking the girl's palm, replied that he would never do that. The young heir smiled and added that he could not even think about such a thing. But the heroine, suddenly calling Helios a liar, said that at the moment of her torment before death, he had not visited her chambers once for a whole month. The man was seriously surprised by his wife's words and asked what other death she was talking about. The protagonist suddenly came to her senses and, apologizing to the gentleman, explained that she had simply had a bad dream. But suddenly the girl's inner voice asked Celia why these concealments were happening, since she herself wanted to tell him a lot. The main character, looking at the confused Helios, thought that everything was so because it was because of him that she spent 10 years of her life in torment. When the sorceress had not yet been reborn and was in her 10th year of marriage to the prince, she secluded herself in her room and decided to read a letter from her father. In the letter, the father congratulates his dear daughter on her birthday and sends her best wishes from his distant country. In the message, the man hopes that everything is fine with her and the prince. Celia immediately remembered what had happened to her recently. She was walking down the corridor, accidentally meeting her husband and meeting his gaze. The girl assumed that he would at least say something to her since it was her birthday, but the prince simply turned away from her and walked on. Now the lady frowned as she looked at the letter and thought that, unfortunately, this man was not even paying attention to her on such a significant day. Suddenly, someone knocked on the lady's door. The girl allowed the stranger to enter. Grid appeared in the room, smiling happily and handing Madame a bright bouquet, congratulating her on her birthday. The sorceress thanked the man and was about to take the bouquet, but Mr. Utila suddenly pulled it away, saying that he had forgotten to clean the stems of the flower from thorns. Taking her bouquet, the lady happily said that there was nothing to worry about, while the crown prince was hiding a suspicious piece of paper behind his back. The young man told the girl that he was glad that she was satisfied because he chose the best bouquet for her. The princess once again thanked her relative for not forgetting her birthday and knowing about her preferences. He replied that they had been living under the same roof for many years, and besides, she was a member of the family and it was clear that they should know each other well. The protagonist told the man that he was absolutely right, but she herself thought that Helios did not consider her part of his family. Grid, having examined the girl's room, said that his brother apparently had not visited her this year either, to which Celia replied that this was so. The man sighed at how insensitive Helios was, but the lady admitted that she was already used to it. Suddenly, the sorceress flinched when the master told the lady that his brother seemed to see her only as a tool, and that must be annoying. But Milady decided not to show it, and decided to quickly put the bouquet in the vase. However, as soon as the lady passed by the window, she saw her husband on the street who was busy with work. The girl decided to watch him for a while, but unexpectedly met the prince's gaze. Then Grid approached the lady from behind, and with a suspicious smile on his face, he told the princess that she should let go of thoughts about her husband. The protagonist realizes that, despite their marriage, Helios perceives her as a stranger. And even on the day she met her doom, his attitude did not change. It was all not a dream, but reality. Celia did not expect love from her husband. It would have been enough for her that he respected her and that he showed her that her existence was not without meaning. Looking now at her husband, who was staring at her in bewilderment, the girl realized that her feelings and desire to disappear from this world were real. The sorceress's eyes darkened as she looked at her palms in defeat, but she said that she was wrong about it being a nightmare. The lady asked Helios furiously if he had any idea what it was like to live 10 years alone with no way to escape and to listen to constant criticism of his uselessness, which could not be refuted. The heroine jumped to her feet and angrily asked her husband if he knew what it was like to live alone without the ability to ask anyone for salvation. The prince, too, shocked to say a word, simply continued to look at his wife, but she declared that because of what she had experienced, she could not forgive him. The girl, gritting her teeth in rage, quickly walked towards the door, wanting to leave the room. The protagonist realizes that Helios has changed, and now he is not the same man who made her suffer for long and painful years in complete solitude. The princess nervously clenched her fist and thought that she of course understood everything, but she simply could not forgive him. Tears began to flow down the girl's cheeks because she despised herself for expecting kindness from Helios. But suddenly the girl notices something unusual. Her hands, for no apparent reason, began to glow. The prince hurried after his wife and called out to her, but she, without even turning in his direction, ordered him not to come closer. The lady sternly decided that she did not want to see him, but the man suddenly hugged his wife from behind, saying that he could not allow her to cry alone. However, the young man was horrified when he saw Celia's condition and that her hands were glowing. The girl herself closed her eyes from fatigue and mentally asked her husband to stop being so kind. The main character gains consciousness in a certain world similar to a dream where someone's hand strokes her head. The protagonist's mother appears next to her, a smiling blonde in a green dress. Celia was very surprised by her appearance, and her mother also greeted her. The sorceress, unable to contain her emotions, rushed into her mother's arms. She laughed and told her daughter that she was already an adult, but she was reaching out to her like a child. The girl sadly replied that she hadn't seen her for a long time and asked her mother to allow her this weakness. Suddenly leaving her mother alone and looking around, she asked where they were, to which the woman said that they were in the world of her dreams. Hearing this, the princess looked around in surprise and opened her mouth. The lady remembered that at the moment when Helios embraced her, her body was illuminated by light, and then she seemed to fall into a dream. Meanwhile, the mother decided to tell her daughter that she was a great girl for trying so hard. However, the woman, frowning, declared that her husband was a real scoundrel because he dared to ignore her beautiful daughter. The sorceress fiercely supported her mother and added that in her past he was generally disgusting. But suddenly the main character fell silent and covered her mouth with her fingers because she realized that she had just blurted out something unnecessary. The mother smiled and told her daughter that everything was fine and that she knew very well what she had faced in 10 years of marriage, even in another life. The heroine was so touched by her mother's words that she burst into tears, and Mrs. Hervey told her daughter that she was sure that she was tired of Helios's detached behavior and his decrees. The mother, angrily clenching her fist, admitted to her daughter that she couldn't even imagine how much she wanted to give him a thrashing. The heroine hugged her mother again when she added that the prince behaved differently in this life. Celia suggested that it could be because of the divorce. The woman said that even if he had changed so much, it was too late. But the girl suddenly admitted that she was on the verge of forgiving him. The sorceress wondered if her anger might leave her if she saw Helios trying. Then the mother told her daughter that she heard sadness in her voice and asked her if she thought he deserved forgiveness. Celia bowed her head and said that it was actually her past self that was stopping her. The girl asked her mother what would happen if she forgave him, although judging by the pain she had experienced, it would be unfair to her. But the mother, gently touching her girl's face, said that she lives here and now and must think about what she wants. Tears came to Celia's eyes when her mother added that this was, after all, her life. Meanwhile, in real life, the heroine's body is on the bed, around which Mary and Helios have gathered, very worried about what happened. The maid told the prince that, according to the doctor's diagnosis, Her Highness was being tormented by her own magical power, destroying her body from the inside. The doctor, standing next to the lady's bed, asked anxiously what was causing the magic to go beyond the control of its magician. The doctor then said that all people referred to the accumulation of negative emotions. The man explained that magical power is like a vessel that can be filled with negative emotions. When emotions become excessive, the vessel collapses and the magical power gets out of control. Mary, looking sadly at the lifeless princess, said that Celia was of course a powerful magician, but even she was not able to bear this. Helios, frowning with anger at himself, said that it was all because of him, and it was he who had done something that could not be undone. A new day dawned, and the young gentleman pulled back the curtains on the window in his wife's room. After this, the man put a vase with a beautiful bouquet of gerberas on the table of his beloved. Mary's maid, looking at the flowers, told the prince that they were simply beautiful. The gentleman smiled and said that he chose this bouquet because he thought Celia would like it. After some time, the prince and the maid began to care for the main character, who was still unconscious. The servant was surprised at how carefully the prince combed his wife's hair, because she never thought that she would see His Highness, who wielded a sword, so well comb his wife's hair so carefully. Helios told his subordinate that he would continue his work from tomorrow, but would like to temporarily move his office to Celia's room. She said that she would fulfill his wish, but asked if it was really necessary, since she could look after the princess herself. The man said with a smile that he himself wanted to look after his beloved. Hearing this, Mary suddenly realized that the prince's words reminded her of those very memories. One day, the prince and princess came to the town square to take part in a ceremony, but suddenly the sorceress became ill and fell to the ground. And the maid, while the other servants began to whisper excitedly about how no one knew how to help the victim, rushed to her mistress. Running up to the prince, who was holding his wife in his arms, the girl asked him to give her everything. Mary explained to the gentleman that it would be easier for him since everyone at the ceremony was waiting for him. But suddenly Helios, taking his wife in his arms and rising to his feet, resolutely replied that he would sort it out himself. His Highness, noticing that the maid was deep in thought about something, asked if she remembered that ceremony. The girl asked in surprise how he knew, to which the man said that Celia woke up in tears that day, and he couldn't even console her. The prince admitted that it was too late for him to regret such a thing, but here is why he no longer wants to leave his wife alone. Day after day passed, and the sorceress still did not regain consciousness. However, Helios did not forget to regularly renew the flowers in the vase for Celia. The gentleman also never neglected to court the heroine. He combed his beloved's hair every day. The sick woman was not forgotten by her friends either. Count Grace came to the protagonist to see her and support her loved ones. So on one of those evenings, Helios, as usual, walked down the corridor to his wife's room carrying a towel and medicine in his hands. But suddenly he came across his brother, who smiled at him in greeting. The prince asked what he wanted. Grid, instead of answering, began to be indignant because he had come all this way to meet his brother, but he still hadn't said hello to him. Then Utala said that he was aware that Lady Celia had an excess of magic in her system. The prince said that was so. The heir immediately exclaimed that he had warned about this and reminded his brother that the sorceress could not stand him, and it would be better for him to stay away from her, although he even followed her to Grimoire. The man with a grim smile decided that a nightmare would happen when the princess woke up and saw her husband, whom she dreamed of divorcing, by her bed. The young heir did not interrupt his relative, but only listened to him without taking his wary gaze away. Grid told the prince that he could take care of Celia himself, and he could go about his business. But suddenly, Helios, frowning, tells his brother that he only believes the words of his wife. To which Mr. Utala turned around and, waving his hand, walked on, telling the prince that he would remember his words when he brought his wife to tears again. Arriving at the main character's chambers, His Highness placed the towel and medicine on the bedside table, not taking his eyes off the sleeping sorceress. He stroked a strand of the girl's hair with his fingertips and thought that it didn't matter whether Grid was right or not. The man is convinced of this because he understands that all this time he has been avoiding Celia, thinking that he only causes her anger, and this led to her fearfully asking her husband if he would leave her, although Helios had given her his promise to do so. But suddenly, while the prince was busy with his thoughts, Leto appeared at the open window in the room, who, biting a lollipop, told the master that his sister had apparently had a hard time. His Highness furiously asked the boy what he was doing there, to which he greeted him with a bright smile and said that he had come for a celebration. The young man, looking at the boy with a stern gaze, asked what kind of celebration he had in mind. The boy joyfully ran up to the gentleman and said that he had helped him a lot, and therefore, as a token of his gratitude, he wanted to show him something.